Have you ever felt a strange pull towards people, places, or even memories that shouldn't logically exist? What if those mysterious feelings aren't just coincidences, but echoes from lifetimes you've forgotten? In today's extraordinary journey, we'll unveil the hidden story of reincarnation, a truth quietly erased from history, yet impossible to silence completely. From secret scrolls to censored scriptures, you'll discover evidence that your soul's journey stretches far beyond this single life. Stick around to learn how ancient wisdom, surprising biblical clues, and even modern science are merging to rewrite everything we thought we knew about life and death. If you've ever sensed there's more to your story, you won't want to miss what's next. And remember, subscribing to this channel not only supports more enlightening journeys like this, it connects you with a community dedicated to uncovering life's deeper truths. From the very first breath we draw, there are quiet echoes in the air around us. Whispers of experiences and stories that seem older than our freshly opened eyes. These echoes belong to truths that were never fully eliminated, only covered over by the relentless layers of history. Picture it like an ancient script written onto parchment, then hidden behind fresh lines of ink. The original letters remain obscured but intact, waiting for someone to peel away the layers and rediscover them. Once upon a time, before we used these modern languages or built our grand temples to define spirituality, people sensed these echoes within their souls. They understood something that with the passage of centuries was systematically pressed into the margins of religious teachings. No bonfires consumed this knowledge, at least not in the way we like to imagine with dramatic flames. The theft of these truths happened gradually and quietly, with fear and conformity acting as the gentle hands that buried them. What are these truths? They revolve around the notion that our souls return repeatedly, not for punishment, but for growth, not to suffer, but to learn, and not in a linear path, but in a cyclical pattern of departure and return. If we dare to listen closely, we can detect these truths in the spaces between words, the moments in our dreams that we cannot quite rationalize. The idea that we have been here before, or that certain places resonate so deeply they feel like home, used to be part of collective wisdom. Yet somewhere along the line, that shared knowledge was deliberately suppressed. We were told we get only a single fleeting chance on this earth. The radical possibility that we might come back again and again, refining ourselves each time, was gradually recast as fantasy or heresy, rather than recognized as the powerful, liberating concept that it is. No matter how effectively these concepts were covered up, a part of us always yearned for them. Have you ever felt a jolt of recognition upon meeting a stranger, or sensed an unshakable familiarity when traveling to a place you have never visited? These moments challenge our conventional understanding of time and identity. They also nudge us to question why we experience flashes of insight or wisdom that seem disproportionate to our years. Such questions rarely find answers in a single lifetime, unless, of course, our timeline is far more expansive than we were taught to believe. You might have felt a tug in your heart or a stirring in your dreams about this very thing, and you probably told yourself it was just your imagination. The ancients would say it is actually remembrance, a recollection of something deeply embedded in the architecture of the soul. But how did we lose track of that remembrance? It was not by raging fires devouring sacred manuscripts so much as through subtle shifts in religious doctrine and a gradual enforcement of fear. A single lifetime theology rendered humanity more docile and more easily guided, focusing our attention on immediate rewards or eternal punishments, rather than the grand cosmic unfolding of our evolution across multiple incarnations. In short, the great truth of the soul's return was hidden from us, not because it lacked credibility, but because it offered too much freedom. The good news is that what was buried can be unearthed. And today, people around the globe are starting to peel back the layers and rediscover what their souls have quietly held on to all along. Consider the simple yet profound statement: you didn't lose the truth. It was erased from your story. That sentence resonates more deeply than it appears at first glance. It implies that truth is not something that can simply fall out of our pockets like loose change. Instead, it suggests that truth was once an integral part of our collective narrative, actively woven into our spiritual and philosophical tapestries, and then deliberately removed. Imagine reading an old manuscript only to realize entire sections had been painstakingly whited out. The form of the text remains, but the most liberating message within it has been obliterated. When you look at the history of human spirituality, you will notice patterns of knowledge that reoccur like an ever-revolving door. Ideas about reincarnation, about the soul's long journey, about wisdom accumulated over countless lifetimes. This is no mere footnote in our human chronicle. Ancient civilizations from Egypt to India to Greece had entire cosmologies built around the concept of souls returning after death. They perceived the cyclical nature of existence, birth, death, rebirth, as essential for spiritual evolution. In these traditions, the meaning of suffering and joy both underwent transformation. They were not final tests or divine punishments, but stepping stones leading to deeper awareness. Reincarnation was in many places accepted as a simple fact of existence, so embedded in everyday belief that it required no special ceremony to affirm. Yet in certain religious institutions, particularly as they assumed more political power and formed alliances with empires, this fluid, liberating concept became increasingly threatening. A population that embraced multiple lifetimes might be less easily intimidated by proclamations of eternal damnation or singular paths to salvation. After all, if your soul endures across ages, you have time to learn to grow and to rectify mistakes. The impetus to follow strict dogma out of sheer terror weakens in the face of such cosmic optimism. As a result, these powerful institutions often sought to confine spiritual understanding to a tightly monitored narrative. The more flexible and empowering ideas, like the belief in multiple lives, were systematically edited out, deemed unorthodox, and buried beneath a mounting doctrinal edifice. We see evidence of this historical editing in the hush-hush dealings of councils and synods that decided which beliefs would be sanctioned and which deemed heretical. Passages in ancient scriptures that once spoke freely of the soul's repeated returns were reinterpreted, or in some instances, removed. Over the centuries, the notion that we might have lived past lives was pushed to the fringes of intellectual discussion, relegated to the realm of superstition. And yet echoes of it persist. We encounter it in phenomena like déjà vu, in inexplicable dreams, and in the spontaneous recollections of small children who speak as though they remember places and events long before their birth. We sense it in our deeper moments of knowing or sudden clarity, moments that arrive as if dispatched from a dimension outside time. Those glimmers are not random neurological misfire. They represent the quiet voice of the soul, reminding us of what once was universally known. Far from being a quaint relic of ancient superstition, the concept of reincarnation provides a vast spiritual architecture in which we can better understand our fears, our longings, and our innate capacities. Now consider how all of this might explain those encounters in life where you feel drawn to someone the instant you meet, as though some gravitational pull has already decided your bond. Alternatively, think of the paradox of people who harbor deep-rooted fears, such as a terror of heights or water, without ever having experienced trauma related to those triggers in their current lifetime. Could it be that these fears traveled with them from another era, lodged in the spirit's memory? If we look around us, we also notice prodigies, young children who seem to grasp advanced concepts or display extraordinary abilities without formal training. Some start composing music at the age of 5 or solve complex mathematical problems before most of us even learn to read properly. Mainstream explanations struggle to account for such phenomena. We either label them geniuses or chalk it up to genetics, but that only scratches the surface. What if these children are simply tapping into knowledge their souls have accumulated over multiple incarnations? From such a vantage point, no one arrives in this world as a blank slate. Each of us carries echoes and embers from earlier chapters we lived, whether or not we consciously remember them. Of course, not everyone awakens to this possibility at the same pace. Some remain blissfully or stubbornly asleep, coasting through life without an inkling of deeper inquiry. Others become seekers, haunted by a feeling that there is something more, that life itself is an ever-repeating lesson rather than a one-time exam. The difference often lies in whether a spark goes off inside something that prompts us to question the narrow boundaries we were taught. It is crucial to realize that none of this is haphazard. The wide-scale forgetfulness was in many ways orchestrated. Long before monolithic churches and even before the Bible was neatly bound between two covers, people across the ancient world recognized the cyclical dance of the soul. From the Egyptians who believed in the journey of Ka and Ba to Hindu teachings on samsara and moksha to the philosophical explorations of Pythagoras and Plato, all pointed to the same essential truth: life repeats, and each repetition is an opportunity to evolve. Early Christianity too had factions that spoke of the soul's development over multiple lifetimes, gaining wisdom, shedding karmic weight, and moving closer to unity with the divine. This perspective was not about condemnation or the terror of missing one narrow window of salvation. Rather, it was about compassion and ongoing progress. You are not here to be thrown into a test and threatened with failure. You are here to unfold, to learn how love and wisdom might become your permanent garments. Yet to control a soul fully, the first step is to make it forget its own ancient lineage and cosmic potential. So this belief was stamped out sometimes by brute force, but more often by subtle manipulations. Councils declared certain ideas anathema, and entire lines of thought were removed from mainstream spiritual teachings. But despite centuries of such efforts, the soul has a way of holding on to memories. Remnants slip out in dreams, in uncanny connections, in longings that simply refuse to be silenced. Take, for instance, the powerful statement, "You are not here to be tested. You are here to evolve." Let this idea swirl through your mind for a moment. If you begin to see life not as a single do-or-die trial, but as a vast panorama of experiences stretching across multiple lifetimes, you may start to behave differently. You may become gentler with yourself, not because you believe you have endless time to do whatever you want, but because you recognize that each step, each lesson, each act of compassion contributes to your soul's tapestry across eons. This simple shift in perspective can dissolve existential dread and transform it into purposeful living. A soul that recalls it has lived before is far less likely to cower in the face of threats, whether they come cloaked as eternal condemnation or social disapproval. You understand innately that physical forms have an expiration date, but the essence of who you are transcends that ephemeral shell. This is why reincarnation, once widely believed, posed such a challenge to religious authorities, who found it easier to govern people by instilling fear. If an individual believes there's only one shot at existence, they can be corralled into compliance, pressured to obey out of the dread of eternal punishment. But if that same individual has the conviction of infinite spiritual progression, the standard tools of coercion lose much of their effectiveness. This strategy to condense human life into a one-time proposition was quite ingenious from a power standpoint. It instilled a sense of urgency and anxiety, urging everyone to follow established doctrines and dogmas, lest they lose out on their sole avenue to redemption. Conformity became synonymous with salvation. Meanwhile, those who harbored more expansive views, such as the possibility of living multiple earthly lives, found themselves edged out, branded heretics, or dismissed as delusional. Whole councils convened to decide which parts of Scripture to keep, how to interpret them, and which teachings to discard entirely, all to enforce a narrative that supported the newly minted theological framework. Yet throughout history, in quiet corners or hidden enclaves, the older knowledge endured. Whispers persisted that maybe we do come back, that maybe these fleeting episodes of recognitions, déjà vu, dreamlike flashbacks, inexplicable familiarity, were not mere accidents of perception. People who felt an inner pull toward past life memories sought out esoteric schools, mystic paths, or philosophical groups that dared to entertain or preserve these ideas. Even some sects in early Christianity believed that Jesus' teachings, when properly decoded, implied a cyclical progression of the soul. In modern times, the curiosity about reincarnation resurfaces with surprising force, not just among spiritual seekers, but also among scientists and psychologists. Case studies of children recalling past lives, documented by respected researchers, keep cropping up around the world. These examples challenge our strictly materialistic worldview, suggesting that consciousness itself may not be neatly confined within the bounds of our current physical birth and death. The power structures that once successfully squashed such beliefs now have less authority as information flows more freely than ever before. In the digital age, knowledge that was once clandestine can reach anyone open to discovering it. Maybe you have experienced déjà vu so vividly that it left you tingling with goosebumps, or perhaps you have a repeating dream set in a historical era you have never studied. You might have a peculiar affinity for a language or culture you have had no direct contact with in your present life. These phenomena serve as silent invitations reminding you that the journey of the soul is infinitely more profound than conventional narratives suggest. Our modern culture often dismisses such experiences, labeling them coincidences or illusions. But in almost every ancient tradition, from the banks of the Nile to the Indus Valley, from Athens to Jerusalem, these would be taken as clues, hints that the tapestry of the human story is infinitely more layered than what we see on the surface. Listen, the ancients would say. Listen to the small voices you hear in the quiet of your dreams. Listen to the echo in your heart when you read about places and times that spark an inexplicable nostalgia. When you do listen, you may realize that your sense of identity is just the tip of a vast iceberg. Beneath that tip lies an expanse of memory, lessons unresolved, attachments, talents, and so many other traces of life experiences that did not commence at your birth date on your current identification document. Perhaps you sometimes catch yourself saying, "I feel so old," with a sigh that seems heavier than your chronological years. These are not random illusions. They are signposts pointing to deeper layers of self-aspects that might have walked the earth in a different guise, a different era. This is why the notion of reincarnation remains ever present in the undercurrents of human thought. It resonates because on some intuitive level, many of us sense that we are far more than a single lifetime can convey. Once you let that possibility enter your heart, the world around you looks different. It is as if you awaken to a new depth of perception, seeing each encounter and experience as another brushstroke on a larger canvas. Maybe that irrational fear of drowning you have had since childhood is a vestige of something you once lived through. Perhaps your immediate connection with certain individuals is the continuing saga of relationships that began lifetimes ago. No wonder so many who have near-death experiences or spontaneous past life memories come back transformed. They speak of clarity and purpose as though the illusions of a one-and-done existence simply can't hold after what they have glimpsed. These revelations highlight the monumental difference between living in dread of a final ending and living with awareness of a continuum. In one scenario, we are pressured to get it right in a single trial. In the other, we recognize that the soul, resilient and evolving, weaves its story across multiple acts. Yet here, we must also be vigilant. The resurgence of this knowledge can be manipulated or turned into shallow entertainment if we are not careful. Reincarnation is not a parlor trick or a tool for sensationalism. It is a profound spiritual blueprint. It teaches us empathy, responsibility, and the notion that what we do now will ripple into future embodiments. Rather than being paralyzed by guilt or fear, we can embrace a more expansive comprehension of justice, mercy, and progression, a pattern older than any man-made ideology. Reflect on this. You didn't find this message. It found you. There is a gravitational pull we seldom talk about, one that extends beyond conventional explanations of coincidence or algorithms. It is as though our deepest questions emit a signal into the universe, and that signal guides us toward the answers we are ready to receive. If you have read this far, you have already felt the subtle tug on your consciousness. Ask yourself, why do you feel compelled to explore these mysteries of the soul? Why have these questions about who you might have been and why certain people or places feel so strangely familiar followed you like a shadow? In many spiritual traditions, there is a belief that when the student is ready, the teacher or teaching will appear. This is as much about resonance as it is about education. Perhaps your experiences, your heartbreaks, and your glimpses of something beyond the ordinary have collectively nudged you toward this doorway. A part of you has quietly yearned for it, even if the rest of you was unaware. And so here you stand, confronted by ideas that challenge the standard narrative about life and death, about time and identity. You might be excited, or you might be uneasy. Both are valid responses to a truth that can shake the foundations of how you view existence. As you delve deeper, you may realize that this is not a quest you undertake alone. All around the globe, there are millions who share your thirst for deeper wisdom. They too wonder if they have walked these roads before, if they have loved certain souls before, and if the lessons they confront in this lifetime are continuations of older stories. The isolation you might have felt, thinking these were strange personal fantasies, fades away. Recognizing that your curiosity is part of a collective reawakening is both comforting and affirming. It is also worth acknowledging that this journey is not about accumulating more intellectual data. In fact, an over-reliance on intellectualization can sometimes hinder spiritual insight. Reincarnation points to something the rational mind struggles to confirm through direct measurement. You will not find neat formulas pinned to a blackboard, conclusively proving the soul's migration. What you will find instead is a symphony of anecdotal evidence. Children recounting details of lives they never lived in this timeline. Individuals experiencing sudden fluency in unknown languages or entire cultures whose historical records speak of cyclical rebirth as a plain fact. Then there is the intangible yet powerful domain of personal experience. Encountering a stranger who feels like a missing piece of your heart, or stepping foot in an unfamiliar city only to recognize its streets and corners as though you have long known them, these moments defy conventional explanations. They hint at a tapestry of consciousness weaving across centuries and geographies. And although we live in an era dominated by scientific empiricism, we also sense that humanity is gradually outgrowing its insistence that reality must be confined solely to what can be tested in a lab. We are in the midst of a quiet revolution, in thought, where the doors to deeper inquiries are being unlocked. Imagine this gentle scenario. You stumble upon a video or a text about past lives late at night. Initially, you are curious but skeptical. Yet something keeps you from turning it off. You continue intrigued by stories that seem wild. At first, stories of individuals who claim to recall specific details of previous existences. You might scoff, your critical mind swirling with disbelief. Yet if you remain open, you notice a growing sense of recognition. A memory flickers inside you, not a concrete recollection of events, so much as an emotional familiarity. It resonates in your chest like a chord struck in a hidden chamber of your heart. When those feelings surface, they demand attention. Many people respond by questioning their sanity, wondering if they have simply been influenced by some imaginative tale. But for countless others, this small experience becomes a gateway, opening them to an entire realm of exploration they had never seriously considered. It is as if a hidden puzzle piece clicked into place, making sense of scattered clues they had previously dismissed. This phenomenon of stumbling onto a reminder or a clue underscores the concept that truth, particularly about our eternal soul, often comes looking for us, rather than the other way around. Think of it as if you have left messages for yourself throughout time, only to stumble upon them when circumstances finally align. Sometimes these messages come through a powerful dream, a profound coincidence, a synchronistic meeting, or even a random article or comment that gently redirects your thinking. Hence the notion you didn't lose the truth, it was erased. The process of erasure can be traced historically. There were councils in the early Christian church, for instance, that debated whether the soul's journey through multiple incarnations should be taught or banned. The desire was often to solidify church authority and ensure reliance on sanctioned doctrines of salvation. Fear became the lever to move masses. Present them with a one-chance scenario, and they are more likely to obey. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, such as in India or among the mystics of various regions, the concept of reincarnation remained firmly integrated into daily life. Individuals there continued to operate under the belief that they, their parents, and their children would live out multiple sojourns on Earth, refining their souls over time. In this new era, as we connect digitally across continents previously hidden and knowledge resurfaces, researchers compile thousands of verified cases of past life memories in children. Hypnotists guide people into regressions that reveal uncanny details. Spiritual seekers compare notes in online communities about inexplicable recollections. The previously quiet hum of reincarnation talk is building into a more audible conversation. This does not mean that everyone must believe blindly, but it does encourage us to keep the inquiry open, to accept that our place in the cosmos might extend far beyond our immediate family tree or a single block of decades. And so, maybe you feel this sense of coming home each time you engage with these perspectives. Perhaps you are reading not simply for entertainment, but because part of you recognizes an ancient call. You might be near or far from believing wholeheartedly, yet you are undeniably intrigued. Whether you fully embrace the idea or hold it as a curious hypothesis, the important takeaway is that your soul is stirring, asking you to consider the vastness of its existence beyond any single lifetime. At times, we might wonder if this is all true. Why was it hidden from us for so long? The simplest explanation often points to the interplay of power, fear, and control. We can track this dynamic throughout history. When rulers or religious institutions recognized that a free and expansive perspective on the soul's journey empowered individuals rather than institutions, they acted to suppress it. It is much easier to govern a populace that fears a once-only existence culminating in either eternal bliss or doom than to influence a citizenry confident in their eternal progression. Historically, we see how theological stances shifted over time. Early scriptures contained hints of reincarnation. Some of the earliest Christian theologians, like Origen, openly discussed the pre-existence of souls and their continued journey. Yet later, councils such as the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD moved to condemn these ideas officially. This was not a matter of discovering a new truth, but of imposing an official stance that excluded the idea of repeated earthly lives. The motivations were at least partly political, ensuring that the faithful viewed the Church as the only gatekeeper of salvation. If you are taught that you have only one shot to get it right, you would do well to follow the Church's dictates meticulously. But if you view the infinite arcs of your existence, fear loosens its grip. This does not mean there are no moral consequences, quite the opposite. It suggests we are deeply responsible for our actions, but across many lifetimes, with ample chances to learn and refine. Actions in a single life are threads in a grand tapestry, and the soul eventually must face all the patterns it has woven. This perspective champions accountability without resorting to dread tactics. It invites us to see suffering not as an unearned punishment, but as a reflection of lessons we have yet to master or burdens we carry from previous existences. Meanwhile, we notice that even when mainstream religious frameworks deny reincarnation, everyday believers still have experiences that suggest otherwise. These experiences range from déjà vu to intuitive knowledge, to spontaneous regressions that come unbidden. Moreover, multiple faith traditions beyond Christianity never obscured this concept. In Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and certain esoteric Jewish and Islamic traditions, the transmigration of souls is a cornerstone offering a broader cosmic vision in which to make sense of life's repeating narrative. The fascinating thing is that many who explore different spiritual paths end up discovering these convergent themes, reinforcing the idea that reincarnation is not an isolated or fringe doctrine, but a global phenomenon of spiritual knowledge. When we see these patterns weave together across continents and epochs, we are forced to acknowledge that reincarnation might not be a mere invention of one particular culture or era. Instead, it could be part of a deeper cosmic truth that humankind keeps stumbling upon, only to have it hidden again at strategic intervals by those who wish to maintain specific structures of influence. In our current age of rapidly shared information, these old walls of secrecy or exclusivity are starting to crumble. The same mystic texts that were once locked away in monastic libraries or known only to small circles are now accessible through a few keystrokes. This is both an opportunity and a challenge we can discover more, but we must also discern carefully and integrate the knowledge meaningfully into our lives. Sometimes the question arises, what does this actually change for me today? Let us consider that for a moment. If you adopt the viewpoint that your existence is not a short, one-time performance, but part of a grand continuum, your relationship with challenges and aspirations shifts dramatically. Failures become less devastating and more instructive. Patterns of behavior, whether they be harmful or beneficial, are no longer confined to a short timeline. They have roots that might reach back beyond your current conscious memory. Thus, you become more inclined to break destructive cycles or cultivate positive qualities, understanding that the stakes extend far beyond one obituary. A sense of responsibility deepens because your actions in this life will echo into future embodiments. You are no longer trying to meet the arbitrary demands of a distant judge. You are crafting your own soul's destiny. Each kindness, each cruelty, each fear you overcome or wisdom you embrace leaves a lasting imprint on the blueprint of your being. You see, reincarnation does not absolve you from moral responsibility. It magnifies it because everything you do contributes to the composite you will be in the next round and the next until you have learned all that you are meant to learn. Moreover, life's unfairness no longer seems so arbitrary. The child born into poverty, the individual blessed with extraordinary talents, the horrifying accidents or strokes of fortune all might be part of a larger tapestry of karma and growth. While we should be careful not to oversimplify suffering or blame victims for their circumstances, this perspective can imbue compassion with a deeper resonance. You can empathize not just because someone is suffering in the here and now, but because you sense that you too could have walked that path in another life or may yet experience it in the future. Interestingly, the possibility of multiple lifetimes also eases existential fear. Death, while still a transition worthy of reverence, ceases to be the ultimate end. The dread of vanishing into nothingness or facing a one-time ultimate judgment softens. This alone can liberate a vast reservoir of spiritual energy and personal courage. Imagine living life with a sense of continuity, even if you do not recall all the details of what came before. A certain innate wisdom might start guiding your choices, telling you that hatred, cruelty, and ignorance lead you down repetitive dead ends, while compassion and understanding pave roads that bring you closer to unity with the divine or universal truth. In practical terms, embracing reincarnation can fuel your desire for self-improvement. Traits you develop, patience, courage, humility, do not simply vanish when your current body fails. They become seeds that will bloom in a future incarnation, bringing you ever closer to your highest potential. Simultaneously, harmful patterns such as envy, greed, or vengeance are not left behind at the grave, but can cling to the soul, prompting repetitive lessons. Realizing this can galvanize you to confront and transcend them now. You see, reincarnation is not about ignoring worldly problems. It is about addressing them with an expanded lens, one that includes eons of spiritual effort and consequence. Let us turn our attention to how diverse cultures and faiths have interpreted these truths, which once wove a unifying thread across civilizations. In ancient Egypt, for example, the notion of death was not an end, but a corridor through which the soul traveled potentially to return. Much of their funerary practices, from elaborate tombs to the Book of the Dead, were designed not just to ensure a pleasant afterlife, but also to guide the soul's journey. They dissected the concept of the soul into multiple parts, and others indicating that the essence of a person was multifaceted and did not simply disappear upon physical death. Similarly, in ancient India, the concept of samsara, an ongoing cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth, forms the bedrock of Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain philosophies. According to these teachings, karma propels the soul through various incarnations, each presenting an opportunity to learn to purify and ultimately to transcend the cycle entirely. Merging with the divine or achieving enlightenment is portrayed as the soul's eventual destiny, yet the path is diverse and can stretch across countless lifetimes. Suffering from this standpoint is not needless agony, but a calling to resolve unresolved karmic debts and refine the soul's character. Among the ancient Greeks, philosophers such as Pythagoras and Plato spoke of transmigration and the soul's immortality. Plato's dialogues refer to the soul being exposed to eternal truths before descending into a new body, yet forgetting these divine insights upon arrival. The idea was that through philosophical inquiry and virtuous living, one could remind oneself of these higher realities. And yes, these concepts shaped Western thought profoundly, even if later doctrinal developments attempted to cloak or sideline them. These varied cultural streams share a striking consistency. The soul is seen as more enduring than its immediate embodiment, and life extends across multiple experiences in physical form. When Christianity arose, especially in its early stages, there were indeed voices, such as that of the theologian Origen, who posited the pre-existence of souls and the potential for repeated earthly sojourns. Yet later, official decrees would isolate Christianity from these ideas, carving out a stark one life, one chance ideology that diverged from many other ancient traditions. The result was a shift from a cosmic worldview focused on progressive refinement of the soul to one dominated by a singular high-stakes test. Now, in the modern era, science and spirituality intersect in fascinating ways. Researchers document cases of children who remember previous lives, describing details later found to be accurate. Psychologists incorporate past life regression therapy, discovering that some patients find relief from phobias or traumas once they revisit and symbolically resolve events believed to stem from a former lifetime. Such findings provoke lively debate, but they also highlight how these ancient beliefs are regaining traction in a world that claims to value empirical evidence. The question that arises is, does the breadth of compelling anecdotes, cross-cultural consistencies, and therapeutic outcomes indicate that reincarnation is not just a relic of superstition, but a genuine aspect of our spiritual reality? No matter how one interprets these convergences, it is clear that the idea of reincarnation weaves a narrative of unity and continuity. It suggests that each of us is not just a passing spark, but part of a grand, luminescent pattern that has played out since time immemorial. In that sense, the bigger question is not whether reincarnation is true in a material sense, but how acknowledging it might expand our sense of responsibility, empathy, and connection both to one another and to the cosmos at large. Reflect for a moment on why this rediscovered knowledge might matter so urgently now. We live in an age where consumerism can overshadow purpose, where we often view life as a race to accumulate achievements or material goods. Many people sense a lingering emptiness in all of this. They yearn for meaning beyond the immediate demands of success or survival. Reincarnation, as an idea, offers an antidote to the superficial lens through which we are often taught to see ourselves. It says, you are more than your possessions, your job title, or even your genetic makeup. You are an evolving consciousness that has chosen this particular time, place, and set of circumstances to learn something vital. When you consider that your soul might have been here before and likely will be here again, your priorities begin to shift. You might stop measuring your worth by external yardsticks and start asking deeper questions. What lessons am I here to integrate? Who are the people I am meant to meet? Again, perhaps to heal old wounds or fulfill uncompleted tasks of love. Where does my unique skill or passion fit into the broader tapestry of human evolution? This shift can help you transcend the usual narrow-minded pursuits and connect with something more timeless and profound. Moreover, a sense of interconnectedness emerges when we realize we are all part of an ongoing dance of reincarnation. Today's stranger may have been our closest ally or fiercest rival in another life. This humbling perspective can foster compassion in ways that go beyond typical social or religious obligations. We might think twice before judging or harming another because we understand at an intuitive level that we are all bound by the same cosmic rules. We have all made mistakes and we have all had triumphs. We have all been powerful and we have all been powerless.
Such awareness can cut through arrogance, resentment, and envy. Also, the wide acceptance of reincarnation in many parts of the world counters the notion that it is an outdated or exotic belief. In countries and cultures where these teachings never died out, people live with the idea that each individual's path spans multiple chapters. It influences how they approach family, societal responsibilities, and spiritual practices. Elders may impart stories of a relative who, as a child, recalled details of a bygone era. Entire communities can regard the passing of a loved one not solely with devastation, but with a more nuanced perspective that blends grief with the understanding of transformation. This is not to say such societies are free of human conflicts, but their worldview regarding life and death is undeniably broader, perhaps offering emotional resilience that purely materialistic cultures struggle to maintain. At present, the globalizing world is allowing for more cross-pollination of ideas. What was once guarded in monasteries or taught exclusively in small circles of mystics is now widely available. Western-trained psychologists are collaborating with Eastern spiritual practitioners, exploring reincarnation not as a matter of blind faith, but as a framework for understanding complex human experiences. The door is open for a deeper, more inclusive spirituality, one that does not necessarily demand we forsake reason or science, but that invites us to expand our definitions of what is possible. Let us circle back to a sentiment that resonates through all of this. Every glimpse of déjà vu, every pull toward the mystical, every truth that resonates in your chest. Without logic, it's your soul remembering. This line underscores that knowledge of reincarnation often arrives as a felt experience rather than a purely intellectual deduction. In many cases, the mind tries to rationalize or dismiss it, but the heart persists quietly, insisting that there is something real in those fleeting moments of recognition. Perhaps it is the sudden warmth you feel with a particular person, as though your souls share an ancient bond, or the strange certainty that a foreign landscape was once your home, long before your present birth. To the rational observer, these experiences might seem like subjective flights of fancy. Yet once they appear consistently and with enough detail, especially in young children who have not been influenced by external stories, they challenge the notion that they are mere coincidences. In such instances, reincarnation becomes less a matter of belief and more a matter of direct testimony. The rest of us who have had subtler brushes with memory may not have names, dates, or exact details to corroborate. Nevertheless, the underlying emotional truth feels undeniable. When we embrace the possibility that such memories are valid, we also open the door to self-healing. Traumas, phobias, deep-seated anxieties, some of these could have origins older than our current chronology. At first glance, this may complicate therapy or personal growth, but it can also offer relief. Knowing that unresolved pain might stem from events that took place in a previous existence can bring a sense of understanding, even if it does not erase the pain instantly. It becomes a new angle from which to approach the healing process. Techniques like past life regression are rooted in this premise, and numerous accounts describe individuals who found relief once they identified and released the trauma's hidden roots. Paradoxically, this same perspective can alleviate guilt. Many people carry burdens from their past actions in this life, or even from recurring negative patterns that they cannot fully explain. Reincarnation says you have multiple opportunities to address and correct your mistakes, to refine your character, and to atone for any wrongdoings. Instead of languishing in shame or helplessness, you realize you have a continuum of possibilities stretching before you. This is not to encourage complacency, I'll fix it next time, but to remind you that your efforts to transform yourself echo beyond your current lifespan, so it is wise to get started sooner rather than later. Ultimately, whether you approach reincarnation through the lens of personal healing, moral responsibility, or cosmic adventure, the notion we keep encountering is that the soul is resilient, purposeful, and far older than our physical records suggest. Our daily dramas may feel less absolute when we remember that we have stood in many costumes on the grand stage of life. Each role teaches us something: compassion as a healer, humility as a beggar, courage as a soldier, and patience as a farmer. Over countless lifetimes, these lessons accumulate, weaving a grand mosaic of who we are and who we are becoming. So here we stand, revisiting what may be one of humanity's oldest secrets, a secret that was never truly lost, but tucked away in the dim corners of religious and philosophical writings, kept alive by mystics, by children with inexplicable memories, and by our own fleeting but persistent glimpses of the eternal. When you consider the phrase, "you didn't lose the truth," it was erased, you can feel a subtle sense of indignation at having been denied something so vital, yet also a surge of gratitude that it managed to survive all attempts at obliteration. It speaks to the resilience not just of ideas, but of the collective human soul. This knowledge is not merely theoretical. It wants to transform you. The next time you have a dream that feels more tangible than a hazy nighttime scenario, you might pause and wonder if it is surfacing from the deeper well of your soul's history. The next time you meet a person and feel instantly comfortable or inexplicably wary, you might entertain the thought that you are encountering a spirit you have known before. The next time you find yourself inexplicably drawn to a particular historical period or culture, you might ask if it is a silent memory echoing across the boundaries of time. This shift in perspective is like discovering a key to a locked door in your psyche. Open that door, and an entire wing of your consciousness becomes accessible, one filled with recollections, lessons, old wounds, and ancient joys. But it can also be daunting because, as we said, it expands your sense of moral and spiritual responsibility. You realize that the dramas and challenges of your current life are part of a continuum. This can instill both humility and a greater resolve to live with integrity. After all, it is your soul that reaps the rewards or consequences of each thought, word, and action. Of course, not everyone in your life may share this openness.
You might encounter skepticism or even strong pushback. That is a natural reflection of how ingrained the single lifetime paradigm has become in many cultures. Still, the aim is not to evangelize or force anyone to accept this viewpoint. It is to allow your own soul's journey to unfold authentically, and perhaps in doing so, inspire others to explore the possibilities for themselves. The story of the soul's many lives is not about division or dogma. It is about unity with your own past, unity with the souls who cross your path, and unity with the cosmic tapestry that includes all of creation. So as you continue reading, bear in mind that these words are not an endpoint, but an invitation. They beckon you to examine your own experiences, those unspoken intuitions and uncanny occurrences. They urge you to quiet the mind's chatter and tune into the deeper resonance of the heart. For in that resonance, you might catch the faint yet powerful melody that has followed you across centuries. It is the melody of your own evolving essence, calling you to reconnect with a truth so vast that it can never be fully erased, no matter how many times authorities have tried. And so, we arrive at a kind of threshold, poised to look more closely at how these ideas were systematically removed or at least hidden within key religious texts and traditions. Before we step across that threshold, let us take a moment to affirm what we have gleaned so far. We have recognized that the concept of reincarnation was once widespread among ancient civilizations, influencing everything from morality to funeral rites, to philosophical outlooks on life's purpose. We have seen that in early Christian thought whispers of multiple lifetimes existed, championed by certain theologians and mystics, only to be suppressed over time. We have also acknowledged that the impetus behind this suppression often boiled down to power dynamics and the desire to keep believers dependent on a singular route to salvation. Yet at the same time, we have discovered that reincarnation persists like an undercurrent. It speaks through children's recollections, emerges in regression therapy, and resonates with individuals all around the world who find pieces of themselves in times and places they have never physically visited. This undercurrent threads through quantum leaps in scientific research as well, where some physicists speculate about consciousness not being strictly local to the brain, or where psychologists observe that past life narratives can have therapeutic value. As we pivot to examine the deliberate erasure of reincarnation teachings in scriptural sources, particularly those surrounding the Bible, we need to hold onto a certain sense of discernment. When we look at passages that may have once hinted at the soul's cyclical journey, we must remember the context in which translations, redactions, and doctrinal decisions took place. This will not be a simple timeline of conspiracies, but rather a nuanced exploration of how socio-political events influence the shaping of spiritual doctrine. Powerful emperors, councils, and religious leaders all played a part in crafting a narrative that would serve institutional goals while marginalizing older or alternative perspectives. Ultimately, this conversation is about reconnecting with a dimension of our heritage, spiritual and historical, that was systematically clipped from official teachings. And it is not merely an academic pursuit. Understanding how reincarnation got edited out of mainstream doctrine reveals broader truths about how societies manage and manipulate knowledge for control or unity. It encourages us to question what else might have been lost or censored along the way. More importantly, it helps us reclaim a more expansive understanding of our own existence, one where the soul's story does not hinge on a single ephemeral life. This concluding reflection for part 1 brings us to the doorstep of a deeper revelation. we have glimpsed the broad outlines of reincarnation's significance and how its removal from common teachings impacted everything from individual psychology to global cultures. Now we will journey into the heart of how certain biblical passages can be read through a lens of cyclical existence, and how key historical moments like the Council of Constantinople and the role of Emperor Justinian set the stage for centuries of spiritual forgetting. As you move into part 2, keep your heart and mind open. The deeper we go, the more the veils lift, reminding us once again that no council or empire can fully extinguish truths that are woven into the fabric of the soul. In part 1, we explored how the idea of reincarnation once thrived in many ancient cultures, from the Egyptians to the Greeks, to the early Christian mystics, only to be suppressed as religious institutions aligned themselves more closely with empire and political power. We concluded with a promise to examine more closely the deliberate removal of these teachings from the mainstream Christian tradition. Here in part 2, we step firmly onto that path, peering behind the curtains of history to see how certain councils, emperors, and theological debates conspired to silence beliefs that threatened established authority. In doing so, we continue to trace the subtle fingerprints left by those who tried and failed to erase the soul's ongoing story. One of the most pivotal moments in this grand erasure was the career and subsequent condemnation of Origen of Alexandria, an early Christian theologian who lived between the 2nd and 3rd centuries. A man of prodigious learning, Origen authored thousands of works, treatises, commentaries, and homilies, seeking to harmonize Christian revelation with the philosophical riches of his time. What set Origen apart from many of his contemporaries was his conviction that the soul did not appear brand new upon physical birth. Instead, he believed the soul pre-existed the body, carrying the potential for repeated earthly lives if it failed to achieve spiritual purification. This view, though not entirely unique in early Christianity, was spelled out with unprecedented clarity in Origen's writing. To a modern reader, it might seem odd that someone so central to early church thought could later be castigated as a heretic. After all, Origen's influence loomed large, shaping the work of later theologians and even receiving praise from many early church fathers. Yet by the 6th century, the political and religious landscape had transformed drastically. Christianity was no longer an underground faith nurtured among persecuted believers. It had become the official religion of an empire. Institutions gained prominence, and with prominence came the desire to enforce dogmatic unity, a theological viewpoint that allowed for multiple incarnations of the soul, granted individuals considerable spiritual autonomy. If your cosmic journey could span numerous lifetimes, you would be less dependent on a single institution or a single lifetime's worth of rituals to ensure salvation. Here enters Emperor Justinian and his equally influential wife, Theodora. They recognized or feared that beliefs in a cyclical soul undermined the strict structures of spiritual authority they were cementing. Justinian convened a series of councils, culminating in the Second Council of Constantinople, 553 AD, at which Origen's teachings were anathematized, effectively removed from orthodox Christian doctrine. By that time, Origen himself had been dead for centuries, but his ideas still lingered, inspiring segments of the faithful to see a broader, more merciful vision of a soul's travels. The council's objectives were multifaceted. Some bishops may have sincerely believed Origen's views were erroneous, while others perceived them as a threat to church unity and, by extension, imperial stability. Once condemned, Origen's works were hidden or destroyed,
and his theology of the soul's evolution across lifetimes was denounced as heretical. Remarkably, even the act of censoring Origen's work did not neatly eliminate the broader idea of reincarnation. It survived in hidden enclaves in the works of mystical Christians and in parallel streams of esoteric Judaism, Gnosticism, and later forms of Christian mysticism. Yet the official line had been drawn in the sanctioned narratives of Western Christendom. The soul was now depicted as having only one shot at life. No second takes no progressive refinement. In the face of such proclamations, many quietly turn to more orthodox positions. Others, however, continue to hold a deeper memory, preserving these truths beneath cryptic language and in the hush of secret gatherings. Thus, the story of reincarnation within Christianity did not vanish. It merely traveled underground, waiting for a future resurgence. To unravel how Origen became such a lightning rod for controversy, we must first understand the scope of his contributions. In his seminal work on the First Principles, also known by its Latin title De Principiis, Origen laid out a grand spiritual cosmology. He posited that all souls were originally created by God and lived in unity with the divine before some fell away through neglect of their love for God, thus initiating a journey through material reality. This journey could involve multiple lifetimes in different bodies, giving souls repeated opportunities to return to that original state of unity. Such a view radically reframed concepts of sin, suffering, and redemption. Suffering was not necessarily the result of a single life's misdeeds, but might reflect unresolved lessons or tendencies carried over from prior incarnations. Likewise, redemption extended across multiple lifetimes, guided by a merciful God who provided ample paths for return. These ideas were not an outlier in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Many early Christian thinkers were heirs to Greek philosophy, especially Platonism, and its belief in the immortality of the soul. Moreover, mystical or Gnostic groups speculated on the soul's journey through various celestial spheres, with each world serving as a station of learning or purification. While the institutional church struggled to define orthodoxy, multiple interpretations coexisted. This diversity was gradually stripped away as Christian communities grew in power and faced pressures to unify doctrine under recognizable creeds. Now insert the figure of Justinian, who ruled the Byzantine Empire from 527 to 565 AD. As emperor, he took an active hand in theological matters, aiming to quell the controversies that had arisen after the Council of Chalcedon, 451 AD. He was determined to create uniformity in the empire's faith, and Origen's writings had endured long enough to become a target. Justinian's agenda was not simply spiritual, it was also deeply political. Strongly centralized control required that the faithful adhere to the same core doctrines, avoiding splits that might weaken the empire's cohesion. The idea of multiple lifetimes introduced an uncertainty that imperial authority could not easily leverage to command fear or obedience. If a soul could evolve over time, then the immediate threat of hellfire for disobedience lost much of its sting. Theodora, Justinian's wife, also played a key role. Some historians suggest she feared the possibility that she might reincarnate into a life as lowly or desperate as the one she had escaped. Such personal motives are difficult to document, yet they resonate with the broader theme of anxiety that haunted the elite. If reincarnation is real, then earthly status is transient. One might return to a life devoid of wealth or privilege, eroding the sense of final superiority that came with being emperor or empress. Prohibiting the teaching of reincarnation served as a shield against that fear, closing the door on cosmic egalitarianism. It is crucial to recognize, however, that not all who took part in these councils were purely political in motivation. Some harbored sincere theological objections. They saw Origen's perspectives as diluting the role of Christ's singular incarnation and redemptive sacrifice. By insisting on one life, they underscored Christ's role as the unique Redeemer. Yet regardless of the various viewpoints, the end result was official condemnation. Origen's name was smeared. His texts banished from the educational canon, and his brand of expansive spiritual cosmology overshadowed by the narrower theology that came to dominate. Over time, any scriptural hints suggestive of reincarnation were reinterpreted or simply ignored, setting the stage for centuries of dogmatic uniformity. The condemnation of Origen stands as a prime example of how the powerful can rewrite history, effectively deciding which truths will be remembered. But this story cannot be fully told without recognizing a pattern that plays out repeatedly across the centuries, a pattern in which political ambition merges with religious agendas to suppress teachings that grant spiritual autonomy to the masses. It is worth noting that such suppression does not necessarily stem from malicious intent alone. Sometimes it arises from genuine fear that heretical ideas could fracture the religious unity so vital to maintaining political order. In medieval Christendom, enforced orthodoxy became the norm. Texts that deviated from recognized dogma were systematically eradicated, locked away in libraries, or vigorously refuted by official scholars. The surviving references to reincarnation within Christian scriptures, like Jesus' cryptic statements in Matthew 17 about John the Baptist being the return of Elijah, were explained away as allegorical rather than literal. Even so, these biblical passages remained a thorny puzzle for the more inquisitive among the faithful. Could Jesus have openly endorsed a view of the returning soul only for church authorities to bury it under layers of ecclesiastical commentary? An intriguing case arises in the conversation about the blind man in John 9, where the disciples ask Jesus whether the man's blindness was due to his own sin or that of his parents. If taken at face value, one wonders how a man could sin before birth, unless the disciples believed that the soul existed previously. Still, the mainline interpretation eventually became that this question was purely hypothetical, dismissing any broader theological implications. And with the theological battles of the early centuries, any connection to reincarnation was rendered inaccessible, labeled as unorthodox speculation at best. Yet the idea never disappeared entirely. In certain mystical threads, like the Gnostic Gospels, Kabbalistic interpretations within Judaism, and later Christian mystics who operated on the fringes, the cyclical journey of the soul persisted. Medieval sects such as the Cathars, who flourished briefly in southern France before being violently suppressed, openly affirmed beliefs that echoed reincarnation. They did not use the term reincarnation as we do today, but the essence remained soul's return, carrying forward lessons and spiritual debts. Despite condemnation, Origen's shadow lingered in church libraries, private collections, and references made by later theologians who dared to read his surviving fragments. His original texts were often dismantled, but the ideas had seeped into Christian consciousness. Over time, small groups and individuals became aware that the official narrative they were taught might not be the whole truth. This undercurrent fueled curiosity in certain scholars, encouraging them to revisit the textual clues that had been sidelined. Even though the mainstream institutions maintained a staunch denial, the ghost of these older teachings refused to be exorcised. This pattern of erasure is not confined to Christianity.
Across cultures, we see repeated instances of reigning powers, be they monarchs, caliphates, or later secular regimes, attempting to control the spiritual imagination of the people. Whether it is by burning libraries, outlawing traditions, or orchestrating show trials. For those with divergent beliefs, the storyline remains familiar. Official power constrains spiritual diversity in order to consolidate control. Reincarnation, with its promise of expansive horizons for the soul, has always been one of the prime targets precisely because it unchains believers from immediate institutional dependence. To deepen this historical tapestry, we should examine how early manuscript traditions were shaped under imperial and ecclesiastical scrutiny. The Bible itself, as a compiled text, did not simply descend from heaven in a leather-bound edition. It emerged gradually through a complex process of selecting which Gospels, letters, and apocalyptic visions would be recognized as canonical. Scholars and church leaders wrestled with these decisions during influential gatherings, including the synods of Hippo 393 AD and Carthage 397 AD, and in later reaffirmations. Any text that carried overtly Gnostic or esoteric leanings risked exclusion. Over time, references to reincarnation were either excised, deemed allegorical, or replaced with more ambiguous terminologies. Translations also played a big role. Once the Bible was rendered into Latin, the Vulgate became the standard for Western Christendom. Any subtle nuance in Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic that might hint at cyclical return or pre-existence of the soul could be toned down or redirected. Furthermore, scribes often worked under the watchful eye of church authorities. If a passage left too much room for heterodox interpretation, marginal notes might reinterpret it in line with accepted doctrine. While few scribes outright deleted entire sections, such editorial constraints could thoroughly shape how future generations understood a text. Simultaneously, other forms of spiritual writing were subject to rigorous policing. Origen's works, which at one point rivaled Augustine's in depth and range, were systematically stripped from official libraries. Many Greek manuscripts went missing, locked away in monastic archives, or hidden in regions outside the empire's tight theological control. With time, references to Origen's more daring concepts disappeared from popular discourse. He remained known primarily for his biblical exegesis on certain passages, but not for his radical teachings about pre-existence and the potential for multiple earthly sojourns. As centuries passed, average believers in Europe grew up under a theology that emphasized a one-time earthly life, followed by the judgment that led to either eternal salvation or damnation. This narrative shaped cultural norms around sin penance and redemption. The fear of making irreversible mistakes loomed large, making believers reliant on the Church's sacraments to stay within the bounds of God's grace. In that environment, the concept of a soul returning for multiple attempts at spiritual refinement was inconceivable, at least in official teachings. However, pockets of alternative thought survived in cryptic forms. Monastic writings sometimes included curious marginalia, or saints' lives included unusual hints about the continuity of souls. Medieval legends and folklore also carried forward themes that hinted at reincarnation-like motifs, though these were often dismissed as peasant superstitions. Through it all, the institutional stand remained firm. Reincarnation was a false doctrine foreign to true Christianity. To propagate any notion of it was to invite ecclesiastical censure, possibly even charges of heresy or worse. From today's vantage point, understanding this context can be eye-opening.
It demonstrates how spiritual belief systems are molded not only by scriptural evidence but also by the interplay of politics translation and ecclesiastical oversight. When a concept as liberating as the cyclical nature of the soul encounters the organizational machinery of state-backed religion, the stakes get very high. The outcome is rarely determined by pure theological reflection alone. Yet despite the weight of these historical forces, the memory that we have been here before never completely vanished. It remains tucked in certain verses in cultural lore, and most importantly in the quiet recall of the human soul itself. Let us pivot for a moment to explore how individuals, despite official condemnation, continued to experience personal revelations that hinted at or directly affirmed reincarnation. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, mystics and visionaries sometimes reported insights that clashed with the singular, lifetime doctrine. While these individuals often couched their revelations in orthodox language, close readings of their visions suggest broader possibilities for the soul's journey. Some claimed that the soul had pre-existed with God before descending into the earthly realm. Others described experiences that implied the soul's repeated engagements with material life. One can look to figures like Meister Eckhart, a German mystic whose sermons and writings grappled with the deep nature of the soul, although he never overtly taught reincarnation. Still, his emphasis on the eternal birth of the divine word within the human soul edged close to ideas of eternal recurrence or ongoing spiritual generation. Another example is found in the writings of certain Beguines laywomen in medieval Europe, who formed spiritual communities outside strict ecclesiastical structures. Their texts frequently show a yearning for union with God that transcends the boundaries of a single lifetime. Though they did not explicitly detail cyclic rebirth, the tone and mystical depth of their words resonate with broader spiritual vistas than the standard one life, one eternity doctrine. Stories circulated during this period about children or adults recounting dreams of lives that seemed to belong to another era. Such anecdotes were whispered rather than broadcast for fear of inquisitorial censure. Yet these stories endured, passed down in families or local folklore. Among peasants who lived closer to the rhythms of nature, beliefs in ancestral spirits or returning souls sometimes wove themselves into Christian practice, creating a syncretic tapestry that was never fully eradicated by official teaching. Thus, while the formal church line denied the possibility of repeated incarnations, the undercurrent of popular experience told a slightly different story. As Europe moved into the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment, scholars rediscovered classical texts, including the works of Plato and Plotinus, who wrote extensively about the soul's immortality and its journey through multiple bodies or levels of reality. This influx of ancient philosophy ignited new debates. Could it be that early Christian thinkers like Origen were part of a grand continuum of spiritual understanding stretching back into ancient Egypt, Greece, and beyond? Some Renaissance humanists inspired by Platonic dialogues quietly challenged the official narrative, though direct confrontation remained risky. Meanwhile, the invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century paved the way for a broader dissemination of texts. While church authorities still held significant power, they could no longer monopolize the flow of information quite as effectively. As books spread, curious lay people and scholars gained access to writings that had once been limited to monasteries or universities. Fragmentary works of Origen, along with newer commentaries, started circulating. Tiny seeds of knowledge about the soul's extended pilgrimage found more fertile ground in receptive minds.
And as scientific inquiry took root, some thinkers speculated that the workings of nature might include cyclical patterns at every level, from the orbital dance of planets to the cyclical blossoming of flora, leading them to wonder if the human soul followed a comparable pattern. In short, the condemnation of reincarnation was never total in its effect. While officialdom declared it anathema, personal experiences, local customs, mystical writings, and the re-emergence of classical learning ensured that the concept continued to simmer. It would take the modern age, however, to bring more systematic investigations of this idea into the open investigations that would cut across religious, cultural, and even scientific lines. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and we find scholars, explorers, and scientists from Western backgrounds traveling to regions where belief in reincarnation remained a mainstream concept, places like India, Tibet, and various parts of Asia. Such encounters sparked fascination and sometimes astonishment. Missionaries returning from these journeys reported that entire civilizations operated on the assumption of multiple lifetimes, with karmic law shaping moral decisions. Some Western observers dismissed these traditions as primitive, while others were intrigued by the philosophical depth and ethical implications. Among the intrigued were intellectuals who recognized parallels between Eastern doctrines and the suppressed Christian teachings. They saw that reincarnation was not merely a peculiar dogma of the exotic East, but resonated with certain threads in Greek philosophy and early Christian thought. These cross-cultural dialogues opened new avenues for spiritual inquiry. The Theosophical Society, founded in the late 19th century by Helena Blavatsky, and others emerged as a key player in bridging Eastern and Western esoteric philosophies, placing reincarnation at the center of its cosmological worldview. Though critics sometimes labeled theosophy as pseudo-religion, it nonetheless expanded popular Western awareness of reincarnation, connecting it to concepts like karma, spiritual evolution, and the unity of all life. In parallel, developments in psychology and psychiatry offered another platform for re-examining reincarnation. Early pioneers like Carl Jung introduced notions such as the collective unconscious, a reservoir of ancestral memories and archetypes shared by all humanity. While Jung never formally endorsed reincarnation, his theories laid a framework that could accommodate past life recall in symbolic or psycho-spiritual terms. Slowly, a new generation of researchers arose, figures like Dr. Ian Stevenson, who took children's recollections of past lives, seriously, systematically documenting and verifying their statements. Stevenson's work, conducted with scientific rigor, found that in some cases, children provided concrete details about deceased individuals, including how they died, names of relatives, and geographic landmarks. This data did not prove reincarnation beyond all doubt, but it presented a challenge to any simplistic dismissal of the phenomenon. Within the realm of clinical psychology, practitioners like Dr. Brian Weiss popularized past life regression therapy, describing how accessing supposed past life memories sometimes alleviated patients' phobias or neuroses that did not respond to standard treatments. While these findings remain contentious in mainstream psychology, they further expand the conversation. Could it be that the psyche stores information beyond the present life, requiring specialized methods to access and integrate these deeper layers? Ironically, what began as an act of erasure in the Christian West sparked a renewed hunger for understanding among spiritual seekers. People discovered that the biblical narrative might contain traces of reincarnation, after all, like seeds left intact in the soil of Scripture. Even if official theology tried to uproot it, the concept blossomed anew whenever conditions became favorable. By the late 20th century, open discussions on reincarnation proliferated in religious and secular contexts. Some Christian denominations remained staunchly opposed, yet many individuals took up personal exploration, merging newfound Eastern perspectives with a re-examination of Christian texts. Thus, what was once a suppressed idea was increasingly recognized as part of the tapestry of global spirituality. Instead of relying solely on an authoritative church body to define the scope of belief, individuals were now free to consult multiple sources, ancient scriptures, scientific case studies, psychological therapies, and their own experiences. In doing so, they inadvertently carried on Origen's legacy, even if they knew little of his specific writings. The soul cycle had come full circle, returning to public consciousness and reminding us that truth once buried has a way of resurfacing when the time is right. Now let us delve more deeply into some specific biblical passages that have been reinterpreted or sidelined over the centuries, as this goes to the heart of how reincarnation was systematically edged out of mainstream Christian thought. A prime example lies in the scene where Jesus discusses John the Baptist and Elijah. In Matthew 17:10-13, the disciples question why the scribes say Elijah must come first. Jesus replies that indeed Elijah must come first, then states Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him. The text continues, then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. This passage in plain reading implies that Elijah's spirit or identity manifested in John the Baptist, suggesting a continuation or return of Elijah in a new bodily form. Over the centuries, official commentators struggled to reconcile this with single lifetime doctrine. They often explained that Jesus was simply making a metaphorical comparison. John was like Elijah in his prophetic mission. However, the direct statement, Elijah has already come, leaves open the possibility that Jesus was indeed affirming a form of reincarnation or transmigration of a prophetic soul. Church authorities thus performed exegetical backflips to avoid endorsing the notion that John the Baptist was literally Elijah returned. Even so, that reading never vanished. It lingered in the texts, serving as a subtle reminder that not all was settled within Christian theology. A similarly provocative scene occurs in John 9, where the disciples see a man blind from birth. They ask Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned this man or his parents that he was born blind? This question implies that the man himself could have sinned before birth, pointing again to some understanding of the soul's existence prior to physical embodiment. Jesus replied that neither he nor his parents sinned, but that this happened so God's works might be displayed sidesteps, a direct conversation about the soul's pre-existence. However, the fact that the disciples even raised that query suggests the concept was not foreign to them. Once again, church teaching would spin a different explanation, usually claiming the disciples were merely confused or that the question was rhetorical. Yet the text hints otherwise. Beyond those famous examples, there are other verses that adopt cyclical language, particularly in the Old Testament, such as the phrase in Ecclesiastes 1:9, "What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun." Though commonly interpreted as a poetic statement about the repetitive nature of history, it has been seen by some mystically inclined readers as pointing to reincarnation. Indeed, the cyclical worldview was more readily embraced in Hebrew mysticism, as seen in Kabbalistic teachings on Gilgul, the rolling or transmigration of souls.
Early Christian writers with Jewish backgrounds may thus have brought this perspective into their nascent faith communities. This scattering of scriptural hints shows that the Bible itself is not devoid of references that can support the soul's cyclical journey. The question is not whether such references exist, but how they have been managed over centuries of theological debate. To the hierarchical church intent on a single lifetime framework, these verses were obstacles to be neutralized. Through careful preaching and commentary, the official narrative insisted that no hidden doctrine of reincarnation lay beneath the surface. Still, the presence of these scriptural moments has continued to intrigue readers, open to broader interpretations, fueling the argument that Jesus and his earliest followers were more accepting of reincarnation than orthodoxy allows. Such biblical passages, combined with the historical evidence surrounding origin and other early Christian voices, offer a compelling argument that reincarnation was never entirely alien to Christian theology. If we broaden our lens beyond canonical texts, we encounter an even richer world of non-canonical or apocryphal writings, some of which hint more directly at the cyclical nature of the soul. Gnostic Gospels, like those discovered at Nag Hammadi, provide glimpses into early Christian diversity, revealing some groups held beliefs about the soul's descent through various realms and the possibility of multiple returns to the earthly plane. Yet by the time of Constantine's reign, early 4th century, and especially under Justinian's edicts, 6th century Christianity had become much more institutionalized. The processes that consolidated church power also narrowed theological acceptance, shutting out the more esoteric doctrines. From that point on, those who dared to speak of pre-existence or repeated earthly lives stood on perilous ground. The official catechisms framed human life as a single, unrepeatable journey, culminating in immediate, irrevocable judgment. For centuries, that teaching went largely unchallenged in mainstream Europe, overshadowing the earlier multiplicities of Christian belief. The transformation was so thorough that modern scholars sometimes assume reincarnation is purely an Eastern idea, foreign to Judeo-Christian thinking. This assumption overlooks the many bridges between East and West that existed even before the Common Era. Alexandria itself was a hub of Hellenistic philosophy, Hebrew thought, and Egyptian wisdom traditions where scholars like Philo and Origen interacted with multiple cultural streams. Thus, the condemnation of Origen was not merely a theological housekeeping. It was part of a larger imperial project to define what would be considered authentic Christian doctrine and to eliminate competing ideas that might diminish institutional control. For the average believer living in medieval Europe, opportunities to encounter alternative perspectives remained scant. Scripture was interpreted by clergy available in Latin rather than the common tongue, and theological debates occurred primarily among church elites. Ordinary people were preoccupied with survival, reliant on priests for spiritual instruction, but the human soul, ever restless, can only be repressed up to a point. Stories lingered about recurring apparitions, ancestral connections, or an uncanny sense of having walked certain roads before. These phenomena were often relegated to folklore, labeled as superstition, and seldom granted theological significance. However, they testify to the enduring nature of these mysteries in the broader human psyche. Moving closer to our era, as translations of biblical texts proliferated in local languages and education spread beyond monasteries, individuals gained the tools to question official narratives. Certain biblical words or phrases once obscure behind Latin now stood in plain sight. Readers encountered the passages we have mentioned and formed their own interpretations, sometimes reaching conclusions that challenged clerical teaching. In the spiritual ferment of the Reformation, many groups demanded direct access to Scripture. Although the mainstream movements of Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Anglicanism still upheld single lifetime doctrines, seeds of doubt found fertile ground in the hearts of those willing to re-examine centuries of church tradition. Like the flow of an underground river, these ideas about the soul's cyclical path never fully disappeared. They carved new channels through esoteric societies, mystical circles, and personal revelations. The synergy between spiritual experience and scholarly rediscovery generated the momentum we see today, where reincarnation is increasingly acknowledged, or at least entertained, by a wide spectrum of seekers, researchers, and religious adherents. Against this backdrop, one might wonder, why does it matter now? Some argue that reincarnation is merely a fascinating theological footnote, irrelevant to modern challenges. But the renewed discussion around the soul's continuous journey could have profound implications for how we approach life and each other. In an age grappling with existential threats from climate change to global inequality, a deeper perspective on life's interconnectedness may hold the key to inspiring more ethical, compassionate behavior. If we collectively accepted that each person is a soul in a prolonged cycle of growth and experience, harming another would feel akin to harming oneself in a future turn of the wheel. This logic is, of course, central to karmic teachings which have guided ethical thought in Eastern traditions for millennia. On the personal level, considering the possibility of reincarnation can shift our attitude toward failure and adversity. Rather than viewing mistakes as potentially damning for all eternity, we can see them as lessons on the path of the soul. A sense of hope emerges, balancing accountability with the recognition that spiritual progress might span multiple existences. This perspective can alleviate crippling guilt, refocusing efforts on remedial actions rather than self-condemnation. Paradoxically, it can also heighten the desire for moral living right now, since we recognize that the energy we set in motion will follow us not just in this life, but in those to come. Moreover, there is the healing dimension, especially in the fields of psychology and alternative medicine. Clinicians who integrate past life regression or take patient recollections of past life trauma seriously often find that these approaches offer breakthroughs where conventional treatments fail. Though skeptics may dismiss it as a placebo or a construct of the imagination, the bottom line is that many patients report genuine improvement. From fears of water to chronic pain with no discernible physiological cause, the exploration of possible past life connections can facilitate emotional release. Even if one interprets this purely as a metaphorical therapy, it can still be transformative. This brings us to the broader cultural movement more than ever. Individuals are stepping away from strict dogmas and forging eclectic spiritual paths. We see the rise of spiritual but not religious demographics seeking experiences rather than doctrines. Reincarnation fits well into this paradigm because it is less about rigid creed and more about understanding our place in a grand narrative of evolving consciousness. It resonates with those who feel drawn to a cosmic or universal perspective where compassion and personal growth take precedence over institutional authority or fear-based compliance. In essence, the question of reincarnation reopens a door that had been forcibly shut centuries ago. That door leads to a more expansive outlook on who we are and why we are here. It challenges us to reassess inherited notions of sin, redemption, and the afterlife,
recognizing that earlier generations of Christians, including some revered theologians, had once walked a different conceptual path. Just as science has evolved from earlier eras and expansions, theology and spirituality also undergo revision and rediscovery. While not everyone will embrace reincarnation, the fact that it is once again part of the conversation signals a re-emergence of older, broader understandings of the soul's journey. In the swirl of modern spiritual discourse, these older teachings find new life, reminding us that truth, like the soul it describes, sometimes circles back, waiting to be recognized in a more open, less fearful era. Let us pause to appreciate the cosmic irony. Emperor Justinian sought to banish Origen's theology of the soul's grand journey, yet the modern reawakening to reincarnation effectively vindicates Origen's core insight. Having once been condemned, his teachings seep through new channels emerging in interfaith dialogues, academic studies, and personal testimonies. The hidden truth has outlived the imperial edict. In fact, current explorers of reincarnation, whether through near-death experiences, hypnotic regression, or cross-cultural comparisons, often arrive at conclusions parallel to Origen's. They find that the soul pre-exists this life, that it grows through moral and spiritual lessons, and that each incarnation is an opportunity to refine love and consciousness. But how did we get from imperial decrees to present-day discussions that accept, or at least entertain, reincarnation? Part of the answer lies in the broader shifts of Western civilization. The decline of monolithic religious power structures, the rise of scientific inquiry, and the expansion of global travel and communication all played roles. As academics became more open to the study of comparative religion, they discovered the striking similarities between ancient Christian concepts once labeled heretical and the mainstream tenets of Hinduism, Buddhism, and other traditions. This fostered a sense of global spiritual kinship and legitimatized reincarnation as a serious topic rather than a fringe belief. Furthermore, the cultural upheavals of the 1960s in the West brought Eastern philosophies into mainstream youth culture. Yoga meditations and concepts like karma and reincarnation reached widespread audiences, blending with or challenging Judeo-Christian frameworks. In many Western countries, this sparked intergenerational dialogues about spirituality, liberation, and the nature of self. For some, reincarnation became an appealing alternative to the strict heaven or hell dichotomy, offering a more nuanced view of spiritual progression. Another driving force was the explosion of popular literature on near-death experiences, NDEs. Authors like Raymond Moody and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross catalogued accounts of peoples who, after being clinically dead for brief periods, returned with memories of encountering deceased relatives, life reviews, and realms of light. Though these experiences do not explicitly confirm multiple lifetimes, they do point to a consciousness that survives bodily death. For many, that insight opened the door to believing in a further continuum of existence. Add to this the anecdotal evidence of walk-ins, mediums, and spontaneous past life recall, and the Western psychological landscape began to echo aspects of the older cyclical worldview. In parallel, archaeology and historical research uncovered lost texts like the Nag Hammadi scriptures or the Dead Sea Scrolls, shedding fresh light on the diversity of early Christian thought. These discoveries reveal a spirituality that was far more pluralistic, mystical, and sometimes in alignment with cyclical understandings of life than the official story implied. While these texts do not always mention reincarnation explicitly, they show a theological fluidity that could easily accommodate it. Scholars use these finds to argue that early Christianity encompassed a multitude of beliefs about the afterlife. The net result is a modern tapestry where reincarnation is no longer taboo. While major Christian denominations still officially reject it, countless individuals within those denominations privately ponder or embrace the concept. Interfaith communities openly include reincarnation in their discourses, linking it to environmental stewardship, social justice, and personal growth. In effect, we are witnessing a recollection, a gathering up of truths that had been scattered by centuries of dogmatic rule. What was once a forbidden teaching now thrives in the global marketplace of ideas, reintroducing an ancient dimension of hope and continuity to a world hungry for deeper meaning. Yet with this broader acceptance comes a host of questions and potential pitfalls. One risk is that reincarnation becomes diluted into a trendy notion devoid of deeper ethical or spiritual grounding. In popular culture, reincarnation might be reduced to a party trick, a quirky anecdote about who you were in a past life gleaned from a quick online quiz or casual past life reading. Such superficial treatments risk trivializing a profound concept that was in its original contexts deeply interwoven with moral responsibility, compassion, and cosmic law. Another challenge arises from the commodification of spiritual experiences. Past life regression therapy can become a lucrative business, attracting practitioners of varying credentials. The line between legitimate therapeutic or spiritual exploration and exploitative showmanship can blur. As a result, some genuinely meaningful experiences may be overshadowed by sensationalism or financial motivation. Skeptics seize upon these excesses to argue that reincarnation belief is inherently unscientific or manipulative. Nonetheless, there are genuine research-backed investigations into children's past life memories, hypnotic regression techniques, and near-death experiences. These studies, while still lacking universal acceptance in academic circles, contribute to a growing body of interdisciplinary research. Some scientists remain open to the possibility of consciousness existing independently of the brain, a stance that aligns with the idea of a soul that transcends multiple lifetimes. Others remain staunchly materialist, calling for more rigorous proof. The lively debate that ensues echoes centuries-old disputes, but now with new technologies and methodologies at our disposal. From a theological standpoint, the reintroduction of reincarnation prompts complex reflection. Could Christianity, at least in some branches, reconcile with a cyclical view of the soul, if it also honors the uniqueness of Christ's incarnation? Are there ways to interpret the resurrection and final judgment in a framework that also allows for soul evolution over many earthly experiences? These questions challenge theologians to rethink dogmas that were solidified under political and historical pressures. Some progressive Christian communities already explore these questions. Others see them as non-negotiable lines in the sand. One might also ask how a reincarnation-friendly Christianity would change the broader culture. Issues like social justice might take on deeper resonance if society acknowledges that perpetrators and victims might reverse roles in future lifetimes, thereby emphasizing empathy and restorative justice. Environmental care might become an even higher priority, as each generation could literally inherit the ecological consequences of their past actions in a future rebirth. Under this cosmic lens, our collective responsibilities extend across centuries. Our actions today shape not just our immediate descendants, but potentially our own future selves. All this underscores the scope of transformation that could happen if Western spirituality fully embraced reincarnation as a legitimate framework. It would not simply be a matter of one more dogma. It would reweave the fundamental relationship between individuals, community, and creation. The linear timeline of birth, judgment, afterlife would give way to a spiral or circular perception, bringing Christianity closer to many indigenous and Eastern worldviews. Such a convergence could pave the way for unprecedented interfaith collaboration, forging a global ethic grounded in the shared destiny of ever-evolving soul. Ultimately, whether or not one personally subscribes to reincarnation, grappling with it can enrich our spiritual vocabulary and ethical imagination. Bringing the discussion back to personal experience, it is important to note that many who discover or rediscover the concept of reincarnation do so not through academic study, but via profound internal events, dreams, synchronicities, or inexplicable emotional memories. You might suddenly meet someone who feels uncannily familiar, even though you have never crossed paths in this life. Or you might travel to a distant country for the first time and feel as though you have come home. Sometimes these recognitions are accompanied by a flood of emotion or flash-like visions that seem lifted out of another era. These experiences can be unsettling, particularly if your background has taught you that such phenomena are either delusions or demonic deceptions. Yet for many, the resonance is too strong to ignore. They start researching, reading case studies, or seeking guidance from spiritual mentors. Along the way, they may stumble on references to Origen, to Justinian's condemnation, to biblical passages that suddenly read quite differently than before. That journey of discovery often feels less like learning something new, and more like remembering what was once forgotten. This is precisely why many describe reincarnation as a truth that resonates in the chest or heart, bypassing logical analysis at first. The mind might protest that it is fantasy, but the deeper self senses something genuine and long-standing. Over time, the intellect can catch up, exploring historical evidence and cross-cultural corroborations. Eventually, a personal conviction emerges that one's soul is indeed older than this lifetime, carrying imprints from prior adventures on Earth. While no single person's subjective experience can stand as definitive proof for all these personal awakenings, contribute to the collective revival of an ancient spiritual principle. Moreover, addressing past life issues can foster healing in the present. People who undergo past life regression or spontaneously recall a past identity sometimes find closure for seemingly irrational phobias, unresolved relationship dynamics, or persistent emotional pain. For instance, a fear of enclosed spaces might trace back to a memory of having been imprisoned in another era, and acknowledging this can release the psychological tension. Skeptics argue that such transformations are placebo effects or the product of imaginative therapy. But for those who experience genuine relief, the effect is real enough to validate further exploration. In a larger sense, these individual journeys mirror humanity's path. Our collective history is riddled with forgotten or suppressed chapters, whether they be spiritual doctrines, cultural achievements, or social values. Revisiting reincarnation thus symbolizes something broader, the willingness to look behind the official narratives that have shaped our worldview. It invites us to reclaim lost or hidden parts of our heritage, weaving them back into a more complete tapestry of who we are and where we come from. And just as an individual might heal through integrating past life knowledge, societies might heal by reconciling with neglected truths that were systematically erased. Reincarnation, then, is not merely about life after death. It touches on identity, memory healing ethics, and the search for a unifying sense of purpose.
In a world often fractured by conflicting ideologies, it offers a larger perspective, an awareness that we may have all played various roles across time, forging connections that transcend the boundaries of this single lifetime. Such an outlook can encourage both humility and compassion, two traits sorely needed in our collective quest for peace and unity. In reflecting on the complex history and resurgence of reincarnation as a legitimate topic of inquiry, one final theme stands out: the resilience of truth. We have noted how certain spiritual teachings have been deliberately obscured or declared anathema. Yet those teachings persist through clandestine networks, mystical revelations, folklore, and individual experiences. This pattern extends beyond reincarnation. It applies to suppressed scientific facts, marginalized cultural contributions, and lost languages. Over and over again, history shows that human curiosity and the drive for authenticity eventually chip away at imposed silence. When Emperor Justinian and his council attempted to stamp out Origen's ideas, they might have imagined that the matter would end there, permanently settling the theology of the Christian world. But they failed to anticipate the complexity of spiritual yearning, the global mingling of cultures, and the human tendency to question official edicts. Above all, they did not foresee how a time would come centuries later when individuals could freely search library shelves, or in our era, the internet, to retrieve evidence that contradicted the official narrative. Technological and cultural shifts continuously create new contexts in which suppressed truths can re-emerge. At the heart of the matter is not merely the doctrine of reincarnation, but the freedom to explore beyond the boundaries of sanctioned belief. Each of us carries an innate spiritual instinct that seeks wholeness. For some, that path leads them to fully embrace reincarnation. For others, it leads to different insights or faith traditions. The key point is that the soul's questions about where we come from, why we suffer, and what happens after death cannot be answered once and for all by external authorities. There is a personal interior dimension to spirituality that defies dogmatic decrees. If reincarnation resonates with that interior sense of truth, no external condemnation can extinguish it. Likewise, there is a social dimension to remember. When large numbers of people awaken to an idea that expands their sense of self or fosters empathy across boundaries of class, religion, and nationality, such awakening changes the course of culture. The notion of reincarnation crosses religious divides, since it appears in various forms in Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, and even Sufi or Kabbalistic thought. It can serve as a bridge highlighting universal questions of the soul's nature. Interfaith dialogues often find common ground in discussing how each tradition views the afterlife. Reincarnation thus becomes a node for unity rather than a cause for division, if approached with mutual respect. Of course, no idea is a panacea. Individuals can misuse the concept of reincarnation just as they misuse any spiritual doctrine. Yet the fact that it has survived systematic erasure and re-emerged in a world with vastly different social structures, technologies, and global connections suggests there is something perennial at work. No matter how times change, we remain a species that longs for deeper meaning. From the vantage point of those who trust in reincarnation, the soul's longevity is merely reflected in the longevity of this teaching. Both are unstoppable. The soul keeps returning, and so does the knowledge of the soul's return. Thus, as we conclude Part 2, we stand at the threshold of integrating the lessons from history with present-day revelations. we have seen how reincarnation was systematically expunged from orthodox Christian belief, only to surface again in personal experiences, new religious movements, and interfaith dialogues. We have looked at the ways it challenges single lifetime dogmas, altering how people interpret scripture and personal destiny. In part 3, we will step forward to explore what this all means for our collective future, how acknowledging the soul's cyclical existence can reshape our ethics, our relationships, and indeed our world. Before we move on, let us briefly summarize the core ideas explored in part 2. We first uncovered how the figure of Origen, once a towering theologian in early Christianity, was posthumously denounced for teaching that souls could pre-exist and reincarnate. The condemnation, orchestrated by Emperor Justinian at the Second Council of Constantinople, aimed to quell a spiritually liberating doctrine that might undermine ecclesiastical and imperial authority. Yet, despite official bans and the destruction of texts, the concept of recurring lifetimes persisted quietly in hidden mystical traditions, local folklore, and personal revelations. We then examined how a few biblical passages continue to pose questions about the possibility of reincarnation, including Jesus' statement that John the Baptist is Elijah returned, and the disciples' query in John 9 about a man sinning prior to birth. We saw that while official church interpretations largely dismissed reincarnation, these scriptural cracks in the single lifetime framework remained a wellspring for speculation. Additionally, Part 2 considered the consequences of erasing reincarnation from mainstream theology, highlighting how it consolidated the Church's role as gatekeeper of salvation while suppressing a more open-ended view of spiritual evolution. Nevertheless, we identified the undercurrents that carried reincarnation forward into modern times. Discoveries of lost texts, cross-cultural dialogues that reintroduced Eastern spiritual concepts, pioneering scientific and psychological research on past life recall, and widespread personal experiences that defied the single lifetime narrative. Finally, we touched on the broader significance of reincarnation's resurgence in today's world. It opens dialogues about ethics, compassion, the environment, and the nature of consciousness itself. It has the power to unite disparate faith traditions around a shared sense of an ongoing spiritual journey. On the flip side, we also considered potential abuses, as any liberating idea can be commercialized or diluted. Yet overall, the reemergence of reincarnation underscores the resilience of spiritual truth, revealing that no imperial decree can forever extinguish something that resonates within the human soul. With Part 2 now complete, we turn our gaze to the future. In Part 3, we will explore how the recognition of reincarnation might transform our personal lives and societal structures if more widely embraced. We will also reflect on practical steps for those who feel drawn to incorporate past life understanding into their spiritual path, whether through regression therapy, comparative study, or reflective practice. Additionally, we will address the critical question: how do we balance belief in multiple lifetimes with full engagement in the here and now? Because ultimately, the goal is not to escape this world by imagining future incarnations, but to live more deeply and responsibly in our present chapter, aware that the soul's story is ever unfolding across horizons we cannot yet fully see. Having journeyed through the forgotten origins of reincarnation's place in early Christianity and the centuries-long efforts to suppress it, we now step into Part 3, a forward-looking exploration of how these reclaimed truths might change us individually and collectively. Whether you are someone simply curious about reincarnation or a committed believer in its reality, the implications reach deep into our ethics, relationships, healing, and worldview. The echoes of past lives are not just intellectual curiosities. They can be powerful catalysts for transformation. First, let us examine the personal dimension. On an individual level, integrating the possibility of reincarnation can shift how you approach your life purpose and challenges. If you believe you have traversed this earth before and likely will again, you are free to consider that your soul selected certain life circumstances for growth. Traumatic experiences in this view are not cosmic accidents, but lessons or unresolved karmic patterns. While this does not trivialize the pain of trauma, it reframes it as a chapter in a much larger story. Imagine that you had a hand in designing the spiritual curriculum of this lifetime, picking your relationships, trials, and even the body you inhabit, all for specific learning outcomes. True or not, the approach can grant a sense of agency and reduce feelings of victimhood. Such a perspective also invites humility. It is easy to judge others when we see them struggling with issues we believe we have mastered. But if we acknowledge that each soul is on a complex journey shaped by both current and former life actions, we might show compassion instead of quick condemnation. Perhaps we have made similar mistakes in a past incarnation, or we might face parallel trials in a future one. In this sense, reincarnation encourages us to embrace empathy, seeing each person's life path as a reflection of deeper karmic intricacies. Moreover, a reincarnation-based outlook can affect our motivations. If you assume you will return, you might feel freer to take creative risks, knowing that failures are part of ongoing growth. At the same time, you become more aware that your harmful actions can boomerang across lifetimes. Unlike a single lifetime narrative, which sometimes leads to the view that one can repent at the last minute and be absolved, reincarnation underscores the continuity of karma, urging us to act responsibly now. Spiritual traditions that emphasize reincarnation, such as Hinduism and Buddhism, have historically promoted non-violence, compassion, and mindfulness of consequences. A revived Christian approach to reincarnation could weave similar virtues into its moral framework. But what about our immediate life tasks? Do we risk neglecting them by fixating on the idea of future chances? Potentially, yes, which is why a balanced perspective is crucial. Reincarnation is best applied as a lens to deepen our presence in the current moment. If each life is a workshop for the soul's advancement, then the tasks at hand, our relationships, careers, personal struggles, are not distractions. They are precisely the arena in which we refine ourselves. Approached healthily, reincarnation fosters both long-term vision and short-term commitment. We honor the fleeting nature of this incarnation, doing what we can to learn and serve. Now, even as we recognize that the soul's story transcends any single mortal frame, from the personal, we move to the communal and societal implications of reincarnation. Picture a world where the majority of people recognize, or at least entertain, the idea that they will return, possibly under very different life circumstances. If you knew you might be reborn in a future generation, might you treat the planet's resources more respectfully? The idea of reincarnation extends the concept of legacy beyond children or grandchildren, implying that you personally might inherit the environmental or social conditions you help create. Suddenly, pollution, deforestation, and climate change become more personal, as you could be the one to face their consequences in a future life. This line of thought can also transform social justice. If reincarnation is real, the abused might become the abuser in a future turn, or the wealthy might be born into poverty to learn empathy from another angle.
while simplistic or fatalistic interpretations of karma can be harmful. You suffer now because you were bad in a past life. A nuanced view fosters compassion for all sides. It can inspire more proactive efforts to alleviate suffering, knowing that the soul cycles through various roles. Systems of inequality might be challenged from a deeper moral standpoint as we recognize an interdependence spanning lifetimes. Education might also evolve if society embraced a broader timescale of personal growth. Instead of focusing solely on immediate academic or professional achievements, we might include curricula that cultivate moral, emotional, and spiritual intelligence, seeing these as investments that carry forward across incarnations. Imagine schools that integrate meditation ethics discussions and reflective practices, framing them not as fringe add-ons, but as central to the development of a well-rounded human being. A culture that recognizes reincarnation would likely place greater emphasis on character-building emotional resilience and genuine wisdom over standardized test scores. Of course, one might argue that we do not need reincarnation to value ethics, care for the planet, or educate people holistically. That is true. Moral and ecological imperatives can stand on their own. Yet the power of reincarnation lies in its capacity to embed these imperatives in a grand cosmic story, one that resonates at a deeper, perhaps more intuitive level for some people. Many find that the notion of cyclical existence speaks to the heart, motivating them more effectively than abstract moral codes. When we see ourselves as travelers on a timeless journey, our moral duties become woven into our personal narrative. This approach counters the aimlessness that can arise in a purely materialistic worldview, where life is viewed as a one-off event. There is also the potential to align reincarnation with more inclusive or universal religious dialogues. While Orthodox Christianity still resists the idea, certain reformist or progressive Christian communities might find ways to harmonize it with the core tenets of faith. The same applies to segments of Judaism, Islam, or other traditions where reincarnation is historically marginal or overshadowed by mainstream doctrines. In a globalizing world, cross-pollination of ideas is inevitable. Reincarnation, once forcibly exiled from Western monotheisms, may re-enter through ecumenical conversations that emphasize shared values, love, compassion, accountability across multiple lifetimes. These conversations can spark new theological insights, breathing life into traditions that had become rigid with time. At this juncture, a practical question arises. How do I explore reincarnation safely and meaningfully if I feel drawn to it? Perhaps you have read historical accounts, scriptural clues, and modern research and find the notion resonates within. One step is to approach the subject with open-minded curiosity rather than dogmatic acceptance. Recognize that reincarnation is not universally proven in the same sense as a scientific law. It remains, at least for now, a hypothesis supported by anecdotal, historical, and experiential evidence. Yet it is also a hypothesis with deep roots and broad cultural validation. If you wish to engage more directly, you might consider reputable forms of past life regression therapy. Seek practitioners with solid training and ethical guidelines, people who emphasize healing and insight rather than sensational storytelling. In a well-structured session, you can enter a relaxed state similar to a deep meditation or mild hypnosis and gently explore the images or emotions that arise. Some folks report vivid recollections of other lifetimes, while others simply experience symbolic journeys that feel metaphorically related to current life issues. In either case, treat the material you uncover as a potential clue to deeper inner processes. Even if you remain unsure whether these visions reflect real past lives or subconscious imagery, you can glean valuable lessons about unresolved emotional patterns. Another route is through dream work. Many spiritual traditions view dreams as a gateway to the soul's larger memory. By keeping a dream journal, you may notice recurring motifs or historical settings that do not match your current life. Reflecting on these dreams can unveil hidden layers of your psyche. Sometimes meditative practices like mindfulness or guided visualization can also awaken deep memories or resonances that hint at past life influences. The key is to maintain a reflective and discerning attitude, avoiding hasty conclusions or letting fantasies overshadow the grounded realities of your present life. Also worth considering is cross-cultural study. Compare how different faith traditions handle reincarnation or soul continuity. Look into the Jewish mystical concept of Gelgul Neshamot Sufi, references to the soul's pre-existence, or the robust traditions within Hinduism and Buddhism that have refined reincarnation teachings over millennia. By observing diverse perspectives, you can piece together a more nuanced understanding, noting similarities and distinctions. This comparative approach can temper dogmatism and guard against the oversimplifications sometimes found in pop spirituality. In parallel, maintain a healthy respect for skepticism. If friends or family challenge, you see it as an invitation to refine your thinking rather than as a personal attack. Reincarnation can be polarizing. Many people are deeply invested in worldviews that exclude it. Engaging in open, empathetic dialogue can enrich both sides. Sometimes that conversation also reveals that even skeptics harbor unexplained experiences or curiosities they have yet to reconcile. Finally, do not lose sight of the present moment. Paradoxically, reflecting on the possibility of multiple lifetimes can deepen your commitment to making the most of this life. It reminds you that you are here for a reason, that your choices hold long-lasting significance, and that every act of love or kindness shapes not just your future, but potentially countless futures. In that sense, reincarnation does not become a form of escapism or denial. Rather, it illuminates the sacredness of everyday living. Another avenue worth exploring is the intersection of reincarnation with contemporary science and philosophy. While traditional scientific models generally operate from a materialist paradigm asserting that consciousness arises solely from brain activity, recent developments in quantum theory and consciousness research have inspired some scientists to rethink these premises. They question whether consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe akin to space-time or energy, rather than a byproduct of neuronal firing. If consciousness is indeed primary or non-local, it becomes easier to imagine that it could continue beyond physical death, possibly re-emerging in a new form or body. Though such speculations remain controversial, they highlight a shift in how science grapples with the enigma of subjective experience. Experiments analyzing near-death experiences, for instance, show patients reporting clear mental activities even when their brains had minimal detectable function. While these accounts do not automatically prove reincarnation, they do raise questions about the conventional boundaries between life and death. Similarly, experiments in parapsychology studying telepathy or remote viewing propose that consciousness might not be constrained by bodily limits. Again, these are not definitive proofs, but they open conceptual doors to phenomena like reincarnation. Philosophers interested in the mind-body problem have also entered the conversation. Dualist thinkers who believe mind and matter are distinct can more readily accommodate a soul that migrates across bodies. Monists and materialists, on the other hand, typically resist such notions, positing that identity ceases with brain death. However, a growing number of panpsychist philosophers argue that all matter has a form of consciousness at a fundamental level. If so, the continuity of consciousness might not rely on discrete material structures, but on deeper principles we have yet to fully understand. Reincarnation in this picture could be viewed as consciousness reassembling around new physical conditions. Of course, the scientific community as a whole remains cautious, and rightfully so. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Yet the door is not as firmly shut as it once was. A small but vocal group of researchers and theorists argue for a more expansive view of consciousness, contending that we need fresh frameworks to account for the anomalies that materialist science cannot explain. They sometimes reference reincarnation case studies, particularly children with validated past life memories, as among the strongest data points suggesting post-mortem continuity of consciousness. Even if the mainstream remains unconvinced, these inquiries represent a significant thawing of the old taboos. From the perspective of spiritual seekers, science's gradual openness to exploring consciousness can be exciting. While faith traditions have long asserted that life extends beyond physical death, the possibility of an eventual rapprochement with empirical inquiry could elevate the conversation. Instead of pitting science and spirituality against each other, we might see a collaborative quest to understand consciousness in its fullest range, which includes near-death experiences, psi phenomena, and potentially reincarnation. If that occurs, it would fulfill the dreams of past visionaries like Origen, who tried to marry reason and revelation in a holistic view of reality. At the same time, it is crucial not to force science into endorsing reincarnation prematurely. Healthy skepticism ensures that we base our conclusions on solid grounds. The dance between open-minded research and rigorous testing can be constructive, pushing both spiritual and scientific frontiers forward. As these frontiers expand, more people may feel empowered to discuss and explore reincarnation without fear of ridicule, ushering in a new era where truths once buried can breathe freely in the light of inquiry. Let us now address an important nuance. How do we integrate reincarnation with the concept of grace or divine mercy? Some might worry that a system of repeated incarnations driven by karmic consequences leaves little room for the grace-filled forgiveness central to Christian theology. Yet upon closer reflection, the two ideas need not be incompatible. Reincarnation can be understood as a backdrop for divine compassion. Rather than having one shot at achieving redemption, souls receive multiple chances. Each life becomes an opportunity for God's grace to meet human free will and transform it, culminating not in endless cycles of payback, but in eventual spiritual liberation. A helpful analogy might be a teacher who allows students multiple attempts to master a lesson. Grace is not absent. The teacher still guides, forgives errors, and supports the student. But the process continues until true learning takes hold. Similarly, reincarnation can be framed as a compassionate system where the soul's ultimate destiny remains union with the divine, even if it takes many lessons to get there. This perspective aligns with certain strands of early Christian universalism, which emphasized that all souls would ultimately be reconciled with God. In that sense, reincarnation can heighten rather than diminish the grandeur of divine mercy. Further, the interplay of grace and karma need not be seen as rigidly deterministic. Karma suggests that actions create corresponding effects, but grace allows for the intervention of higher spiritual forces that can lessen or resolve karmic burdens when the soul sincerely seeks transformation. Indeed, some Eastern philosophies also speak of divine blessings or Guru's grace that can expedite karmic clearing. Thus, a Christian reincarnation theology could incorporate biblical themes of atonement and sanctification into a bigger cosmic framework, acknowledging that God's love operates across lifetimes, continuously drawing souls upward. This brings us back to Origen's concept of apokatastasis, or the eventual restoration of all things. He believed that even the darkest souls would ultimately return to the light, not through a one-time decree, but through a long, rehabilitative process that might span many worlds or epochs. Though Origen's doctrine was condemned, the seed of this idea resonates with modern universalist thinkers who see God's mercy as all-encompassing. Placed alongside reincarnation, apokatastasis forms a picture of a patient, loving God who never gives up on any soul, no matter how many lives it takes to awaken. Indeed, the synergy of karma and grace can lead to an ethic of gratitude. If you sense that your present blessings are partially the fruit of past meritorious deeds, you can still recognize that grace elevates you beyond the mechanistic accumulation of good deeds. The light of compassion and forgiveness can cut through karmic illusions, helping you break habitual patterns. Reincarnation does not have to be a closed system of endless cause and effect. It can be open to divine breakthroughs. Such a theology would quell the fear that multiple lives equals endless toil, instead affirming that each incarnation offers new encounters with love, new pathways to redemption, and new cosmic vistas of possibility. Another question arises: if the soul truly reincarnates, why do most of us not remember our past lives? The typical explanation in traditions like Hinduism or Buddhism is that we pass through the veil of forgetfulness. This veil serves a purpose, allowing each life's lessons to be engaged with fresh eyes. If you arrived fully aware of your past roles, attachments, and traumas, you might find it difficult to engage authentically with present circumstances. Imagine the baggage of hundreds of lifetimes piling up in your consciousness at once. The emotional weight would be enormous. By forgetting, you can focus on the specific challenges and relationships of this incarnation without distraction. However, the veil is not always absolute. Cases of spontaneous recollection, often in young children, suggest that memory can leak through under certain conditions. Traumatic emotional or unfinished experiences from a previous life might leave strong imprints on the soul's subtle body, surfacing when a child's mind is still relatively uncluttered by social conditioning. As they grow older and adapt to the current life, these memories typically fade, reinforcing the default amnesia. Therapists using past life regression similarly propose that hypnosis or deep meditation can temporarily lift the veil, granting a glimpse of experiences stored in the deeper strata of consciousness. From a theological standpoint, one might argue that God or the cosmic intelligence designed the system to maximize soul growth. Each incarnation becomes a unique laboratory, unhampered by explicit recollections of prior experiments. We bring certain tendencies and predispositions our karmic blueprint without the mental clutter of detailed autobiographical memory. Yet the soul does not lose the wisdom or scars earned. They manifest as instincts, affinities, or unexplained fears. This mechanism preserves free will in each life, enabling a sort of fair playing field where we cannot simply rely on knowledge from prior incarnations.
Some individuals long for full recall, convinced it would validate their spiritual identity. But complete recall might also overload or distract them. The aim in many spiritual traditions is not to fixate on who we were, but to understand the universal lessons we need right now. Reflecting on reincarnation can remind us we are part of a vast continuum, but it does not grant license to romanticize past identities. We could have been both oppressors and saviors, the righteous and the sinful, in myriad historical contexts. Moreover, a selective or partial memory might naturally surface when relevant. If a lesson remains unlearned from a previous life, or if a connection with someone recurs, certain impressions might arise as powerful déjà vu or inexplicable emotional resonance. This sort of recollection can guide us to handle old patterns more skillfully. Meanwhile, the majority of past experiences remain dormant because they have been integrated or are no longer crucial for current growth. In this sense, forgetting is not a cosmic flaw, but a strategic design. It preserves our sense of newness, enabling us to tackle present challenges without undue baggage. It also fosters humility. We cannot cling to past glories or successes. Reincarnation thus becomes less about collecting lifetimes like trophies and more about the incremental evolution of the soul's capacity for love, service, and insight. The veil ensures we do not skip steps in this education. Each life is a stage. And while the entire script stretches across time, we only see the scene we are acting in, trusting that the director divine will has placed us precisely where we need to be for this chapter. No exploration of reincarnation in a Christian context would be complete without addressing the figure of Jesus Christ. Traditional orthodoxy holds that Jesus' incarnation was entirely unique, the singular union of divine and human natures culminating in redemption through the crucifixion and resurrection. How does that pivotal event stand if reincarnation is also on the table? One possibility is to see Jesus as a teacher who exemplified the final awakening from the cycle of rebirth, someone who, having transcended karmic limitations, incarnated purely out of divine love to guide others. In Eastern traditions, we find parallels in the concept of bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who choose to return to help humanity. However, Christian doctrine places special emphasis on Christ's once-for-all sacrifice. Many theologians worry that admitting reincarnation might downplay the uniqueness of this sacrifice. Yet others argue that recognizing multiple lifetimes for humans does not diminish Christ's singular role. Jesus could remain the Son of God, whose intervention provides a profound cosmic redemption that intersects with the soul's cyclical journey. If anything, Christ's message of unconditional love might align well with the idea that we are all works in progress across many incarnations. The brilliance of his life could represent a transformative catalyst, enabling souls, even if reincarnating, to ascend more rapidly. Some modern Christian mystics interpret passages about the resurrection as symbolizing not just a single historical event, but an archetype of spiritual rebirth available in each incarnation. They see the empty tomb as a sign that death is not the final curtain. Instead, it is a threshold the soul crosses repeatedly, eventually triumphing through Christ's guiding presence. In this view, Christ is the living path that reconnects every reincarnating soul to the Father, bridging the gap between earthbound existence and divine eternity. Of course, these interpretations remain controversial within mainstream churches. They require a certain theological elasticity to integrate reincarnation with the established doctrines of atonement and salvation. critics might accuse such views of syncretism, blending Christian and Eastern philosophies in a way that dilutes the core gospel. Proponents respond that the earliest Christianity was already a melting pot of Hebrew, Greek, and other ideas, and that perhaps the dogmas we call orthodox were shaped more by imperial politics than pure revelation. Regardless of where one lands, the role of Jesus in a reincarnation-friendly Christianity offers a rich field of contemplation. Some envision him as the cosmic Christ present in every age, assisting souls throughout multiple eras until each finds full union with the divine. Others see him as a teacher who specifically revealed an alternative to the karmic cycle, a direct path to sanctification and unity with God's love. These stances differ in detail, but share a reverence for Jesus that need not be negated by acknowledging multiple lifetimes. Ultimately, how Christians reconcile Christology and reincarnation is a personal or communal choice depending on scriptural interpretation and spiritual experience. For those who feel pulled to integrate, both the path forward may involve careful study of biblical texts, historical theology, mystic writings, and prayerful discernment. The reward, they say, is a more expansive Christianity, one that includes the cosmic breadth of human existence without compromising the transformative power of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. In that expanded landscape, the figure of Christ shines even more brightly, not just as a one-time savior, but as an eternal companion guiding souls across the tapestry of incarnations. Stepping back from theological intricacies, we might ask a simpler question. How can I apply the idea of reincarnation to live more meaningfully right now? The practical dimension often gets lost amidst doctrinal debates and historical narratives, yet it is arguably the most important aspect of all. If reincarnation is indeed a reality, then each new life is an opportunity to refine virtues like compassion, patience, generosity, and courage. We can therefore treat each day as precious, recognizing that while our soul continues, the specific chance to navigate this life's unique challenges is fleeting. Mindfulness emerges as a key practice. By paying attention to our patterns, our immediate reactions to stress, our relationship dynamics, our fears and hopes, we may glimpse threads that feel larger than a single life. Perhaps you notice a perennial fear of betrayal that seems out of proportion to anything you have experienced in your present-day relationships. Rather than dismissing it, you might explore the possibility that this fear is an echo of past experiences. This exploration, whether carried out through introspection or guided sessions, can empower you to heal at a deeper level. Service also gains a new dimension under reincarnation. Acts of kindness or selflessness are not just moral obligations. They become the seeds of future well-being for oneself and others. This viewpoint amplifies the principle of the Golden Rule found in virtually every faith: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In a cyclical cosmos, the others might literally be you in another lifetime and vice versa. Such an insight infuses altruism with profound cosmic interdependence. Moreover, a reincarnation-centered lifestyle embraces resilience. Life setbacks become stepping stones rather than dead ends. Failures, disappointments, and even tragedies are contextualized as lessons in a larger curriculum. This is not to say we become complacent or dismissive of injustice, but rather that we cultivate a calm perseverance. Each test refines the soul's character, preparing it for more advanced lessons ahead. This perspective can help dissolve despair, instilling hope that growth continues beyond any single horizon. Additionally, reincarnation can release us from excessive attachment to external markers of success.
If the soul's journey extends over multiple lifetimes, then no single career triumph or material gain can define our ultimate worth. We might pursue our goals with zest, but without the frenetic urgency that arises from thinking, "This is my one shot at everything." When disappointment strikes, we can handle it with more equanimity, knowing that the soul story is much richer and more extensive than a temporary setback. In relationships, the perspective of reincarnation might reduce blame. If you sense that you and a loved one have navigated multiple lifetimes together, you can approach conflicts with an eye toward karmic healing rather than a fixation on being right. A pattern of recurring arguments might be viewed as a cycle you two are meant to break. This does not automatically solve relationship issues, but it does reframe them in a way that can bring mutual insight and responsibility. By recognizing the depth of the bond, you might be more patient, more eager to resolve negative cycles, and more open to forgiveness. Ultimately, a reincarnation-friendly ethos leads many to embrace daily disciplines, prayer, meditation, self-reflection, acts of service to align their life with soul development. Rather than waiting for an afterlife to enjoy heaven or fear hell, they see each day's choices as weaving the tapestry of future incarnations. The fruit of such an approach is not escapism, but deeper engagement as you realize every moment is a sacred chance to evolve to love and to remember who you truly are beneath the fleeting costumes of time. Let us also consider how remembrance of past lives might accelerate collective healing of historical wounds. The human story is marked by slavery, conquest, oppression, and genocide. Even today, we grapple with the aftermath of atrocities committed generations ago, resentments and traumas passed down through families and cultures. If reincarnation is real, then some of the individuals who once perpetrated violence might be incarnated now in communities that historically suffered under that violence and vice versa. While it is impossible to prove such specifics, the idea fosters a broader compassion. We realize that karmic ties are intricate, and divisions based on race, nationality, or religion may have been reversed in past ages. That does not mean we neglect justice or reparation for present-day wrongs. Rather, it suggests a deeper acknowledgement that we are collectively entangled in each other's stories. A person who understands reincarnation might approach social issues with the humility that they too may have once been part of the oppressor group or might be in another lifetime. This does not erase accountability. It expands it. Everyone becomes responsible for moving beyond cycles of hatred because we all have been or could become any side of the equation. Such a viewpoint can enhance reconciliation efforts. Take post-conflict societies struggling with truth and reconciliation commissions. A reincarnation-aware perspective might encourage both sides to see each other less as fixed roles and more as souls passing through roles. While not a panacea, it can soften rigid identities and open a doorway to empathy. The African philosophy of Ubuntu, reflecting interconnected humanity, resonates here. I am, because we are. If we repeatedly cycle through various human experiences, then collectively, we are indeed one tapestry of souls weaving through different cultural and historical backdrops. Additionally, this perspective nudges us to care more deeply about generational healing. Traumatic imprints can persist across incarnations, just as they persist within lineages in a single lifetime. By intentionally addressing and transforming these patterns, now we may be clearing a path for our own future return, as well as for the collective well-being. Spiritual practices aimed at ancestral healing can be seen as parallel to past life healing.
Both involve addressing energies that linger in the subtle realms, whether labeled as family curses, karmic debts, or psychosomatic scars. Still, it is important to avoid simplistic explanations that blame victims. Saying it's just their karma can be an excuse for apathy or cruelty. A mature understanding of karma and reincarnation recognizes that life is a collaborative interplay of personal actions, social structures, and divine grace. Systemic injustices require systemic remedies. Yet in the background, the soul's cyclical journey adds another layer of responsibility we carry forward, not just the consequences of our personal deeds, but also the moral tasks we left unfinished. We are stewards of both personal and collective karma. Hence, reincarnation expands the moral lens through which we see global issues. Far from making us indifferent, it can galvanize us to break harmful cycles, given the possibility that we might re-enter the stage in a future era. Each step we take now toward reconciliation, ecological balance, or social justice could be an investment in a more harmonious future for ourselves, our children, and perhaps for our own future incarnations. In that sense, reincarnation is not just about personal esoteric curiosity, but about forging a more unified and caring human family across time. In contemplating all these themes, personal growth, social justice, interfaith dialogue, theological expansion, one might sense the sheer depth of possibility that reincarnation opens up. This is precisely why the concept proved so threatening to hierarchical institutions in earlier eras. A soul that believes it has ample time to learn and rectify mistakes cannot be coerced so easily through fear-based tactics. A congregation that sees itself as engaged in a multi-lifetime pilgrimage might become more inwardly autonomous, relying less on rigid creeds and more on the direct wisdom gleaned from spiritual practice and reflection. Moreover, the cyclical worldview fosters a spiritual confidence. If you suspect that you have lived before, you may be less terrified of physical death, seeing it as a natural transition rather than an irreversible ending. This erodes the leverage once held by religious authorities who claimed exclusive knowledge of how to avoid damnation. Of course, responsible teachers and communities can still guide individuals on ethical and spiritual matters, but the dynamic shifts from external enforcement to cooperative exploration. As we stand in the present with the wealth of historical knowledge at our disposal, we can reevaluate the motivations behind reincarnation's suppression in Christian tradition. Clearly, it was not purely a matter of scriptural fidelity. Political factors, theological controversies, and social control strategies all mingled to push reincarnation to the margins. What is remarkable is how the concept survived, nonetheless nestling into the corners of mystic teachings, local law, and comparative religion studies, only to blossom anew in modern times. It is a testament to the enduring allure of the soul's cyclical story. In many ways, the re-emergence of reincarnation parallels the larger shift in consciousness that has taken place over the last century. Global communication, interfaith dialogues, the breakdown of colonial mindsets, and the rise of individual spiritual exploration have all converged to make us more receptive to what was once labeled heresy or fantasy. The Christian West, in particular, can now engage with the East's long-standing traditions without immediate prejudice. People freely share their personal encounters with past life memories or near-death experiences, online generating grassroots discussions that bypass official theological gatekeepers. That said, embracing reincarnation does not automatically solve spiritual or existential dilemmas. Life remains a profound and often mysterious journey, filled with moral complexities, suffering, and unexplainable synchronicities. Reincarnation is one map among many, but for those who resonate with it, it provides a sense of cosmic justice, continuity, and infinite opportunity for growth. It can unite believers of different faiths in a shared sense of awe at the soul's capacity to learn and evolve across epochs. It can also unify science and spirituality in the quest to understand consciousness, bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge research. As we approach the final reflections on this topic, we might recall that every discussion about reincarnation is at its heart an invitation to remember that we are more than these mortal shells, to remember that history is a continuum, and to remember that truth once buried inevitably rises. The flame of reincarnation was never truly snuffed out. It smoldered in the depths of human longing for answers, waiting for an era when open discourse and global connection would allow it to spark back to life. Now let us touch upon the convergence of ancient prophecy and modern technology, two domains seldom mentioned in the same breath. The original text that sparked our exploration hinted at the idea that algorithms and digital media might be part of a cosmic alignment, leading people to rediscover reincarnation. While this notion can sound whimsical, it points to a truth about our modern world: we are more interconnected than ever. A random recommendation on a social media platform or a search engine might direct you to a life-changing video article or online group. If we see synchronicity or divine orchestration at play, then even the digital realm becomes a tool for the soul's unveiling. In earlier centuries, the average person would never read Origen's writings or discover the parallels in Hindu scriptures. Access was restricted by geography, language, and social class. Today, you can download translations, watch documentaries, or join a virtual study group in seconds, bridging distances that once seemed insurmountable. This democratization of knowledge subverts old hierarchical structures that once dictated what was acceptable to learn. It also allows for a multi-perspectival approach, combining biblical studies, Eastern philosophy, psychological research, and personal testimonies. The downside is the potential for misinformation. The same digital networks that spread enlightening ideas can also promote conspiracies or shallow interpretations. Navigating this ocean of information requires discernment, critical thinking, and a commitment to verifying sources. Yet the reward is profound. You can piece together a personal tapestry of understanding, weaving threads from multiple traditions without waiting for institutional approval. Reincarnation, once banished by edict, finds new soil in the hyperlinked environment of modern life. Another intriguing aspect of this digital revolution is the rise of global soul groups, online communities where people suspect they share karmic ties or joint missions. While some are undoubtedly whimsical or role-playing in nature, others report remarkable synchronicities. For example, strangers from opposite corners of the world discover parallel dreams or recall historical lifetimes that match eerily. These might be coincidences, or they might point to genuine shared karmic patterns that technology has finally unveiled. Regardless, such phenomena illustrate the novelty of digital spaces as incubators for spiritual exploration. It also aligns with the broader theme we have traced: truth resists permanent entombment. Whether it is Origen's suppressed manuscripts or an individual child's past life recollection, the soul's cyclical nature continually resurfaces, every domain humans touch, now including cyberspace. People who feel guided to certain online resources often describe it as more than an algorithmic quirk.
They interpret it as a meaningful nudge from the universe or their higher self. In that sense, the digital age can be a catalyst for remembering who we are across time. Of course, technology remains neutral. It can facilitate profound spiritual awakenings or feed distractions and addictions. As always, intention matters. If you consciously use digital platforms to seek insight, you may find a treasure trove of knowledge and a supportive network for deeper discussions. If you approach the internet mindlessly, you may drown in trivialities or manipulative content. The invitation here then is to engage technology with mindful awareness, letting it serve as an amplifier of your genuine spiritual yearning. Through that lens, each click and search can become a small step toward the soul's grand rediscovery. As we near the culmination of our journey through these three parts, it is worth reflecting on the central paradox that has accompanied us all along. The very power structures that sought to eradicate reincarnation inadvertently preserved it. By labeling it heretical, by convening councils to suppress it, the church authorities turned reincarnation into a forbidden fruit, an esoteric secret that certain seekers felt compelled to explore even more fervently. Over time, this quiet interest became a steady undercurrent, quietly gathering force until the modern age when it could emerge boldly once more. We see parallels in the history of esoteric knowledge globally. Many spiritual texts or wisdom traditions flourish after periods of persecution. Sometimes exile fosters creativity, as when Sufis composed poetry under strict regimes, or mystical Jewish writers encoded deeper truths in allegorical texts. Similarly, reincarnation thrived in hidden corners, mystical sects, silent reading rooms, and in the intangible realm of personal experience. Whenever a child recounted a past life memory that was too compelling to ignore, or a visionary caught glimpses of historical eras, the flame of reincarnation burned anew. Meanwhile, the official gatekeepers of religious orthodoxy found that the idea was not so easily dismissed. Scriptural anomalies lingered, and across the centuries, new thinkers and theologians discovered, rediscovered, or reinvented ways to weave reincarnation into the Christian tapestry. Thus, while the mainstream narrative marched forward with its single lifetime theology, an alternative tradition survived beneath the surface. Now, with global connectivity, the story is coming full circle. What was once underground is stepping into the mainstream consciousness. The question we face is not whether reincarnation is right or wrong, but how we integrate it responsibly if it resonates with us. In that sense, we are invited to a mature understanding, one that respects scientific inquiry, honors scriptural complexity, and values personal experience without devolving into fantasy. Such an approach recognizes that reincarnation has moral and psychological dimensions. It can heal or harm depending on how it is wielded. When used to justify injustice, they deserve it from a past life. It becomes a weapon. When used to cultivate empathy, accountability, and hope, it becomes a liberating force. Ultimately, the essence of this dialogue is remembrance. Reincarnation reminds us that we have been traveling a very long road, possibly through many identities and times, always seeking greater wholeness. It also reminds us that the human family is interlinked in ways we might never fully comprehend. If we adopt this awareness, we take a step toward dissolving illusions of separateness. We see each person not just as a random other, but as a fellow soul in the cosmic classroom. From Origen's exiled doctrines to the findings of modern researchers, from biblical verses that quietly hint at repeated lives, To the personal stories that defy one-life explanations, the tapestry is rich. Each thread adds a different hue, historical, theological, scientific, anecdotal, to paint a picture of a cosmos that is continually in motion, continually calling souls back to learn and love more deeply. Perhaps that is what all the ancient teachers, in their own ways, tried to convey, that the journey matters, that love transcends lifetimes, and that the divine nature of the soul is indelible no matter how many times official institutions attempt to erase it. Let us now gather these threads into a concise reflection. Throughout Part 1 to Part 2 and Part 3, we have traced how reincarnation was a prevalent notion in many ancient cultures, including strands of early Christianity. We saw how it became stigmatized, especially under Emperor Justinian and church councils, keen on maintaining a single lifetime doctrine. We noted scriptural passages, such as the association of Elijah with John the Baptist, that point to deeper mysteries about the soul's continuity. We then ventured into the modern revival driven by cross-cultural exposure, scholarly research, personal testimonies, and new interpretations of biblical text. We also explored how reincarnation can reshape personal spirituality, offering a lens through which challenges become lessons and relationships become karmic or soul connections. We acknowledged how it might inspire more responsible and compassionate behavior, extending to global issues of social justice and ecological stewardship. We delved into practical steps, regression therapy, dream work, comparative study, mindful skepticism, and balanced daily living. Along the way, we observed how reincarnation does not negate divine grace or Christian soteriology. It can coexist if framed as part of a cosmic plan for universal restoration. In short, the suppressed teaching has re-emerged as a multifaceted gem, reflecting light across theology, psychology, ethics, and community life. It stands as a testament to the impermanence of censorship. No matter how diligently councils or emperors attempt to outlaw an idea, if it holds a kernel of resonance with human experience, it will reappear in some form. Thus, reincarnation's story is one of resilience, a reminder that the human heart constantly seeks bigger pictures, deeper truths, and broader horizons than any single worldview might permit. Of course, the tale is ongoing. Debates about reincarnation's legitimacy or its precise theological status will persist. Modern denominations may continue to reject it, or they might evolve. Scientists may uncover more compelling case studies, or they may develop alternate explanations for recalled memories and children's uncanny knowledge. Individuals who once dismissed the idea may have experiences that change their minds, while those who once embraced it might grow skeptical. That fluidity itself is part of the evolving human inquiry. For the sincere seeker, the essential takeaway is humility and openness. Reincarnation invites us to see our place in the cosmos as a dynamic process rather than a static state. Whether we wholeheartedly accept multiple lifetimes or hold it as a tentative possibility, the effect is to expand our understanding of time, identity, and responsibility. This expanded perspective does not solve every mystery, but it does bring a sense of wonder, urging us to live more consciously. In that sense, reincarnation can be an aid to spiritual growth rather than a mere intellectual stance. Indeed, the final measure of any spiritual teaching is how it impacts our ability to love, serve, and evolve. If reincarnation inclines us toward greater compassion and dedication to justice, then it has proven its worth. If it leads us into arrogance or fatalism, we have missed the point. The soul's memory, whether partial or fully awakened, is a precious resource,
a map showing where we might have strayed, where we triumphed, and where we still need to go. And in the hush of a timeless moment, we might even recall that we ourselves once walked these roads, carrying the same thirst for truth across eons. Now, with eyes more open, we can continue the journey with renewed purpose. We close now with an invitation and a welcome back to a truth that was always yours, hidden in your heart and in the corners of scripture, history, and human testimony. The phrase "welcome back" resonates on multiple levels. It honors the possibility that your soul has indeed been here before, and that through reading or listening to these words, you have recognized an echo of something long familiar. This entire exploration has been a mirror, reflecting back to you the knowledge that your present lifetime is a chapter in a grand cosmic narrative. The puzzle pieces, scattered across centuries of forbidden doctrine, underground manuscripts, personal epiphanies, and scholarly investigations, fit together to reveal a more expansive reality. So where do we go from here? You might feel a spark to delve deeper, to read more about Origin the Council's biblical passages or modern past life research. Or you might choose a contemplative path, sitting quietly with the resonance you feel, letting it guide your inner development. You could also join communities online or offline where open discussions of reincarnation are welcomed not as dogma, but as shared curiosity. Whether you venture into regression therapy, compare notes with friends who recall intriguing dreams, or simply live more mindfully, remember that the true measure of reincarnation's value lies in how it transforms your everyday choices. If you feel called, you can extend the conversation. Share these ideas with someone who might be open or in need of a fresh perspective on life's hardships. Comment on a platform or forum, lending your voice to the ongoing discussion. Each small act of engagement can serve as another stepping stone for the collective memory to surface. And in a world as interconnected as ours, you never know whose soul you might touch at just the right moment. Perhaps someone wrestling with existential questions, or someone who has quietly carried past life recollections they feared to express. Above all, view this topic not as a fixed belief, but as a living inquiry, a flame that brightens and evolves as you do. Let it inspire humility rather than dogma, wonder rather than definitive claims. The soul story, after all, is infinite, and any conclusion we draw remains provisional from the vantage point of eternal progression. If indeed we return again and again, we might only grasp a fraction of the soul's full journey at any given time. Yet that fraction can be enough to imbue our current life with reverence and purpose. Thus we end where we began, with truths that were never fully erased, but simply buried, waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge. In reading these words and letting them resonate or awaken something within you, participate in that re-emergence. Like the cyclical movement of the soul, the knowledge of reincarnation rises and falls across human epochs. Now in this epoch, it rises again with you as a witness and possibly as a torch-bearer. Embrace that role, gently guided by compassion, discernment, and a recognition that what truly endures is love. May the journey ahead be one of deepening insight and boundless grace. May your soul's next steps, whether in this life or another, carry forward the light you have kindled here. Welcome back indeed to the memory of who you have always been. Exploring the hidden journey of the soul has been more than fascinating. It's felt like coming home to truths we somehow already knew. Whether you're fully convinced about reincarnation or simply intrigued by these compelling mysteries, one thing is clear. History can't silence the profound experiences that countless individuals still carry within their hearts.
Personally, I find comfort and inspiration in knowing our lives might be interconnected chapters of a greater story filled with purpose, learning, and love that transcend a single lifetime. I'd love to hear from you. Do these ideas resonate? Have you experienced moments that felt like memories from another time? Please share your thoughts or stories in the comments below. Your voice adds meaning to our ongoing conversation. Don't forget to subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries that make life truly extraordinary.